Hello everybody, good evening, welcome to Artist Space. Thank you all for coming tonight and happy 2012 to you all. So tonight's event is the first in a series of talks and discussions that will take place in the coming months as part of a partnership between Artist Space and working artists and the greater economy. The conversation between our two organisations began in March last year and is involved in an ongoing discussion about the specifics of WAGE certification programme and how it might be developed and actualised. And the relationship with Artist Space is a way to work through some of the practical considerations and ideological considerations around WAGE certification. I'm going to pass directly over to members of WAGE to further introduce tonight's event and to say a bit more about the certification programme, and also to present tonight's speaker, Hannes Abbey. So I'll pass straight over to Steiner.
Hey everyone, thanks. This is a great turnout. Thanks for coming. Some of you may know, but I'll just give a brief introduction and then pass the mic to Lise to introduce Hans Abbing. WAGE was started in 2008, and it was a group of arts workers, independent curators, performers, writers, and others, speaking about our condition and how we interact with institutions, arts institutions specifically. And since then, we've gone through a lot of changes and thought processes around these issues. And I hope everyone, if you haven't already, can visit our website. It's wageforwork.com, WAGE, W-A.G.E, F-O-R-W-O-R-K. So we're really excited to launch this partnership tonight. This came out of several things that have happened, which we'll get into in a little bit. And I'll just read some of my notes. Hans's book, Why Are Artists Poor? The Exceptional Economy in the Arts, was one of the inspirations for our group. We didn't know Hans then, but we do now because we've met this week. And it's been a really great meeting finally after a couple of years of someone who was inspiring and also analytical and thoughtful. So he'll speak to that. There's lots of amazing things that have happened since 2008, so I won't go over the whole history of the past couple of years, especially the past couple months. But one thing that we've thought about is what work means, and Andre Gors who talked about it's not whether you do or don't have work, it's what you are doing that is work. And so that's something that we've thought about a lot in relationship to art institutions. And a couple other things we thought about are the idea of changing. And Eric Wright wrote about ruptural, interstitial, and symbiotic changes, and we're interested in that dialogue as well, but we can get into that later. We just want to acknowledge that there are different economies that we're participating in, and there are different types of change that we can ask for, and WAGE is asking for change within this space that you're sitting in right now. So as we launch this program, it was originally going to be called Balance Due, but that's not what it's called. Tonight's program is called Feeling the Shape of the Arts Economy, and we thought that that was a really good place to start. So without further ado, I'll introduce Lise Sosclone, and she, I always mess up her last name, that's my accent, and she is going to introduce Hans to you all. Hold on.
Hi, thanks for coming, everybody. So I have to read this stuff. As Steiner mentioned, Hans's book, Why Are Artists Poor? Was key to the formation of WAGE almost 4 years ago. It was motivational in helping us understand our own agency, and through that, the potential for mobility. To give you a little background on Hans, he's a visual artist, an art sociologist, and an economist, which makes for an unusual skill set. He has the lived experience of a practicing artist, much of which is likely common to many of us here. As an art sociologist, he brings an understanding of the social conditions that inform lived experience. And as an economist, he has an understanding of the material conditions within which much of lived experience is contained. In his book, these three positions work together to produce valuable insight into how artists operate within and in relation to the economy. Abbing published Why Are Artists Poor in 2002. It considers the role of subsidies and the gift economy in rates of poverty among artists. I say poverty in quotation marks. Of course, the book is not without its biases, but in its schizophrenic structure, in which he essentially engages in a dialogue with himself, saying that, as an artist I believe X, and as an economist I believe Y, in the incongruity between the two, he illustrates the paradox that is inherent to artists in the production, distribution, and exhibition of our work. This is not to say that his analysis doesn't have implications for everyone working and producing in the arts, because it absolutely does. But for artists specifically, and in this context, understanding the conditions under which we produce, and this includes both the expectations we ourselves bring, as well as the limitations we may feel are imposed, is essential to being fully responsible for the choice to participate as artists. And this, I would argue, personally, is the first and most important condition through which productive activism is made possible. His position in Why Are Artists Poor is the result of an economist's argument taken to its logical extreme, which he will possibly elaborate on briefly tonight. In that book, Hans's economist self wins the argument, and while some might not agree with his position, the questions posed in the building of his argument remain fundamental. So it is W.A.G.E's distinct pleasure to harken back to our roots in hosting Hans Abing here tonight.
We have to work it out a little bit. Maybe I sit, but if possible, I'll stand, because it's nicer to, you can see me and I can see you. But let me know if I'm not speaking loud enough, or we have to reorganize the microphone or whatever, because it would be a pity if some of you wouldn't be able to follow me. Let me try and lift this one straight away. Let's see how it works. Okay. I don't know. We'll see. Yes. This one. And that's the book. It's self-promotion. In science, it's very common to promote yourself. Some people here will probably know. You can show all your books, and it's nobody takes it doesn't matter. In art, you still have to be careful, but it's changed. It's have to be like now on the internet, you can promote yourself very much and really annoy other people by sending emails every week. But yes, in the beginning, I really thought it was. I felt a little bit embarrassed to notice that my colleagues were doing that kind of thing. But maybe it's a good development. We have to see. Maybe it's not so bad, this new attitude of promoting yourself. Yes? Okay. Before I'm going to tell, it has to be louder, or do I have to get louder? It has to be louder? Okay. So I have to stay close to the microphone. Yeah. Let me know again. Let me see. Yeah, so the main thesis, before I'm telling what I'm going to do, would be this one. What's the matter here? There's a contradiction. On the one hand, the value of art is very high. People are prepared to spend lots of money on art, very expensive painting, but even more, they will, build castles for art, museums of contemporary arts which cost millions or milliards, like in Abu Dhabi, Louvre, or in Hamburg, a symphony orchestra building, which is really very, very expensive. So communities are prepared to spend lots of money on art, and at the same time artists are poor. So would you say it's in spite of this, or is it rather because the value of art is so high that the incomes are low? And actually I'm going for the second option. So what I'm going to do is, I have some chapters, you could say. I'll spent quite some time in explaining this phenomenon of poverty in the arts, and speak briefly about this tendency of artists to prefer work to consumption. Yeah? Talk a little bit about the explanation of low incomes, about how art could have become so important in society. And next, we have to talk about artist attitudes. Are they anti-commerce? How does it work out? Why are they now promoting themselves? And then the next three topics are we can do it quite briefly, but it's not unimportant. Suffering in the arts, future of the arts, and maybe some ideas which may run in line with W.A.G.E, or maybe not. Let's see. Well, I'm not going to discuss each of them, you can read them. If you compare artists with professionals with the same level of training, artists are poorer, and they're actually much poorer. Yeah? And then the highest incomes are much higher. In general, there's some exceptions. Sportsmen have high incomes, some lawyers have very high incomes, but on average, there are very high incomes in the arts, but I don't think that's so special. It's more to do with stardom nowadays. Yeah, a winner-take-all principle. You may have heard of, so small differences in quality can cause huge differences in income, and that's also happens also in other professions. But anyway, they can be very high. But you shouldn't focus too much on that. The fact that they're so poor is far more interesting. Okay, and then artists are more often self-employed. They have more often second jobs. This is not all that important. And yeah, so it's just a list. Just have a look. The second jobs are more often not profession related, so it could be working in a restaurant or that sort of thing. Parents are higher educated. It may be telling for certain phenomena. Diplomas are less important. You probably know that. Especially in Europe, social benefits, artists receive more social benefits and more support. Funny little things like artists are more often single, which again could be telling of things you may discuss. They are less often member of a union. Why are you laughing? Okay. And the last one is of course very funny. They more often pay taxes. And the thing about it is not so much that they do that, but that it's acceptable, or more or less acceptable. With any other group, people would get, is it a problem, all this microphones singing around? Or no? Sorry? Maybe somebody take this mic away? Okay. Okay. Hopefully this works. Yeah, I think it makes a difference. So it's not so much that artists evade taxes, but the fact that it's acceptable. You know, people come to my studio and they already have money in cash, so they know in advance that that's what I would like. And with any other profession, you know, a lawyer or whatever, you have to do it far more secretly, and nobody enjoys it. And here it's almost fun. Okay. Poor. Okay, I don't. No, it's not amusing for you to know about. So in most European countries, it's funny. There's done quite a bit of research on it, and it's difficult because who is an artist and who is not? You have to make some sort of definition. It's always a proxy because what you want to measure, it's never. Yeah, you never get it. So it's always some way of approaching who's an artist or not, but independent in one country they do it this way, in another country they do it that way. In Australia they do it differently again, because this also applies to Australia. It's always 40 to 60%, so more or less half of the artists which is below the poverty line. And I don't know for the United States, there are many people here below the poverty line, but if you compare it with people in, with a similar level of training, it's a huge difference. Artists are much poorer. And then among them, usually the visual artists are poorest, although, yeah, in literature, some creative professions, it's hard to tell. Okay, now we go to income from arts. In most European countries, 70 to 80% of the artists, so that's really the majority, cannot make a living from their artwork. Also not if they would work full-time. That doesn't matter. Okay. Yeah, and then numbers of artists are, of course, large. Otherwise, these incomes wouldn't be so low. Per 100,000 inhabitants, there are many artists, and that differs per country. And I would say that in countries where there's much subsidy, the number of artists per 100,000 of inhabitants is probably larger. So then, in an absolute sense, there are also more poor artists. Let's get to the figure. The blue line is income from art. This was 2001 in the Netherlands, but it doesn't seem to have changed much since. I'll have to look at my computer because otherwise you won't be able to hear me. The blue line is income from art. On the vertical axis, it's income in euros, but that doesn't matter so much. It's more the idea. What matters is that, and the horizontal axis is the number of artists who earn less than what's shown on the vertical axis. The red line is the line where in Europe they say this is the poverty line, so that may differ a little bit in one country or the other. So if you see where the blue line crosses the red line, in the case of visual artists in 2001, about 76% of the artists earned from art less than the poverty level. Yeah, so they couldn't possibly make a living from their arts, almost 80%. And then if you see the green line, it's what's sort of the minimum, official minimum income. An employer in the Netherlands is not allowed to pay their workers less than this amount. Yeah? It's usually twice the poverty level. Then you see that about 90, little bit less than 90% of the artists earn less than the minimum wage with their artwork. Now they have second jobs, of course, and other sources of income. Included in the blue line are already subsidies to be, and that's can be substantial in Europe. And then the pink line is if you add other income from work. We have statistics on that. We don't have statistics on overall income. That's when you add money coming from partners, for instance, or from earlier works, people who later on went into the arts. And that's sort of a guess. That's the line with the dots, the black dots. And I assume that, especially on the left side of the figure, that there's quite a bit of, over here, there's quite a bit of extra income coming from family partners and those people. Otherwise, you just couldn't survive. People are, of course, very practical, especially when they're longer in this area. They manage to, they become very clever in living from very little income. Well, some of you know about it. Okay, well, it's to show, just to show, also we could talk about this longer, but maybe more during the discussion, because it could be that certain groups of, if you would specify it more to groups of artists, the figure might look differently. I'm anyway very much talking about generalizations. So you can always say, well, with this group of artists it might be different. Like, for instance, it's very well possible that artists who are making sort of old school work, realistic paintings and sculptures, etc., but they're rather sooner here than here. Well, here there could be relatively many contemporary artists doing media stuff, etc. And they have a harder time to make a living than these people. And then just about this, I heard that here you've got the idea that 10% of the visual artists make a good living. In the Netherlands, that's certainly not the case. It's rather 1 or 2%. And then it goes up very, very high. You know, it goes to the other side of the room. So, that's those very high incomes. Okay. Skip. So, how do the people over here survive? Second jobs, that's very, very important. And they can be art related, or they can be have nothing to do with art. And then they can be terrible jobs, or well, not really terrible jobs, but you know, like working in a restaurant or cleaning. Or they can be very interesting jobs, like my second job, which is very pleasant. So in that sense, I'm a luxury artist, and there are more among us, I'm quite sure, who have good, interesting second jobs, earn quite a bit per hour in the second job. And so in the figure, as far as income from art is concerned, they may well be the ones who almost pay to work as an artist, so on the left side, while when it comes to overall income from work, they may be on the right side. Yeah? So in that sense, all sorts of subsections of artists you may have to study separately, if possible. Income from social benefits was quite important in countries like the Netherlands. Now it's harder to stay on social benefits and not having to apply for jobs, etc. But still, in prosperous countries, there are always mazes in the law, and people let it be for a while, and then you have to find another little niche to get your money from. Unemployment benefits matter, of course. And then support by partners, family and friends, even though there are fewer married artists than in other professions. When they're married, it's often the partner who pays for the rent and all that sort of thing, so it makes a difference. Okay. Second jobs, eh? Oh, sorry. This one. Sorry. Just one little note, I mentioned in the socio-economic circumstances of artists, that artists are often, the parents of artists are on average higher educated than in other professions, comparable professions. They have a similar level of training, which could even be a lawyer or a medical practitioner. In the case of artists, they are higher educated, so it's a reasonable assumption that they also earn a bit more. Anyway, there is something in these previous generations, there is an easiness with money. So in that sense, artists already learned that maybe they don't have to worry so much about money. It's not like children from immigrants. You will find very few of them on art schools. And that's explainable. Even if the parents would already earn similar amounts, they don't have this easiness yet. And so you could also argue, well, the situation of artists is precarious, but it's precarious in a different way than we now always talk about precariousness in the new state of capitalism. Okay. My watch. I think we're doing okay. The work preference of artists. I'm not going to talk much about support because it's not such a big issue here, and why annoy people by saying that subsidies are bad if it's not realistic anyway. This is interesting work preference. When artists with second jobs start to earn more than they need for living, they may not spend it on consumption. They may cut down on the number of hours they work in this second job in order to spend more hours in making arts. I think that will be recognizable for some people among you, especially among young artists. This is quite a common practice. I remember that I used to work with models, live drawing, and those quite often they were dancers. Recently left the conservatory, and actually they were quite greedy. I found there was, there's always this problem with artists and money. There's something special there. And yeah, they really, well, they were good models, but they would say, well, I'm good, and can't you pay a bit more? Well, but other models, they would state their price, or I would state my price, and it would be, well, we would do it, or we wouldn't, but they would sort of try to get the best out of it. And then what happens is that after a while they get a project financed by a foundation or an institution or the government, and suddenly they don't want to model anymore for me. So I say, well, you're so interested in money, I can give you a bit extra, because you're a good model and I want to go on. And they say, no, we don't have time. And I think, actually, they still have time, I'm quite sure. But since there's money coming in, they want to spend all their time and money on practicing, taking extra courses and doing this project. And then as soon as the money is finished, they come back to me and say, I don't have work. So that's typically the work preference, you could say. But it can also be, if you already work full-time as an artist, you could say, and there's more money coming in from whatever source. Again, you don't need to spend it on consumption or on a holiday or a car. No, you can buy a better video camera or that sort of thing. So now this is not only the case with artists. Of course, in other professions, people also may have something like a work preference, but there is a relative difference. In the case of artists, it seems to be quite strong. But if you're already successful and you earn a lot of money, it's not so, it goes down. Okay. Anyway, with age, people become less dedicated generally than they were when they were younger. The low incomes. How to explain these low incomes? That's very much what I do in the book, and I'm currently changing my opinion a little bit about it. The conclusion of the book is very much either artists are irrational, which already in the book I say that's very unlikely, that they are more irrational than other professionals. There's no reason to assume that I don't see any evidence of it, whatever. Yeah? So that we skip that possibility. But it could also be that the other two options is that they are ill-informed or that they are compensated for their low incomes. In other ways, they may get what we would call a non-monetary income. So to put it in an extreme way, artists are either compensated or ill-informed. So you could also say they're compensated or suffering, poor and happy, or poor and miserable. It makes a difference, eh? And I do think that the ill information, and in the book I very much, I say it's both. It could be so. There's to a degree there's compensation, and there's also ill information. We have too much a wonderful idea when you choose to go to the art academy or whatever. You have this idea that everything will be great, and there's the magic of art. You're going to be special. And you could say the ill information is built into society. Maybe already as a kid, you knew that art is something, apart, very nice, special. And then there are more objective things like, well, in countries like the Netherlands, there's this notion of subsidies, and well, there are subsidies, but subsidies may symbolize that there's always this big daddy, the state, who will take care of you. Well, in fact, there's always limits to subsidies, and maybe it only works for a few years, and then you have to manage yourself, but symbolically, it might give the wrong information. Or somebody over here mentioned the fact that there are so many positions to study art, so there are so many art academies, and people are even willing to pay for it, so it must be profitable, you could think. Why would there otherwise be so many possibilities to go to art school? Again, that could be a source of misinformation, but I'm not so sure anymore. I think youngsters pretty well know that their chances are not so good in the arts, but they tend to ignore it. But that's not specific for the arts. It's the same applies to sports, to entertainment. So there must be something else as well. And now this compensation thing, it makes sense, but it's too economic, I would say. Like you can buy something off. It's like an exchange. Well, I will be poor, but I get something else instead. So it's very calculated. And I don't think the human mind works that way. It's not so economic. It's far more short term. But let's have a look. Okay, is this important? Oh, sorry. Let's see what's the next slide. Yeah. This economic reasoning can be of some relevance because we often talk about whether there's an oversupply of art and artists or whether there's just much supply. And if you go for the option of that artists are ill-informed, you could say there's oversupply. But if you say no, they're compensated, they get something else instead of income, of financial income, well, why would we talk about oversupply? It's just they're willing to work for low incomes, and yeah, that's the result is that that there's much art in society, whether it's functioning or not. That would be from the economic perspective. So then you could say, yeah, there is the possibility that you could reason there's no oversupply of art. People always talk about oversupply, but if you go along with this reasoning, you could say no, it's not oversupply. From a business perspective, you could say, and that's why you have to separate these different approaches. Then oversupply makes sense because it's a sector where there's no profit, or if there is profit in some cases, but on average, it's there's no. On average, there's no profit, and then it's not a profitable sector. Banks are not interested in investing in artists generally. There may be a few exceptions. So in that sense, there's oversupply. Okay. Right. Now, I was already saying that it's not. We're not such calculating people, and it doesn't mean that we are irrational, but we move along, sort of path from one event to the next, and one way or another we sort of, almost without knowing what we are doing, you end up being an artist. From one event to the other, something like a vocation develops. So that's the term I would like to use rather as a sociologist. It's a vocation. And in the case of a vocation, you can't say there's compensation or not. It's just, it happens. And that it happens so often, we need to explain. But it's not because of some sort of calculation. It's appealing, a vocation, and you stand out and you are special, but you are special, you have privileges in a vocation, it's quite important, but you also have downsides. So you can't just say the privileges make up for the low income. That's probably the point I would like to make now, and which isn't in the book. And a vocation is also not really a choice. especially not if we go along with the way of thinking which developed over the last 200 years, that art is sort of a gift. It's probably nonsense, but that's the way we like to think about it. So the youngster who gradually thinks, I should go to art school, often will say, I really had no choice. It's the only thing I'm good at. But yes, if it's a gift, I'm not yet sure, I have to find out, but yeah, then I have to follow my heart, or something like that. Okay. About these privileges, maybe we have to talk about it. But yes, there are aspects of a privilege there, like you're allowed to be authentic and to make work which is authentic, while everywhere else in the economy, at least that's the way we believe it, you're always constrained and you have to make products which are good for others, but there may be too little of yourself in there. Well, Marxists would say you're more alienated, is that the word? Yeah, in other professions than you are in the arts. And yeah, of course, there is a chance that you will turn out to be a genius, that you even during your lifetime will be recognized as a genius, and otherwise you can still keep in this. Even that is a privilege to keep open the possibility that even after your death you may be important for society. Well, we don't think so much anymore that way, but maybe deep down. Okay. And there are even funny other, well, of course, yeah, generally you have some prestige. You are indeed special, also among your own circles. Like when I am invited to a party of a colleague in economics, for instance, you know, I get also different guests entering, and the one is a lawyer, and the other is a dentist, and he will never tell their profession when he introduces them. But when I come in, suddenly he says, this is an artist. And so that's nice for me, and it's also nice for him. He puts himself a little bit up. And so in that sense, there is prestige, there is some specialness. But even you're also allowed to be poor. So I already mentioned these tax evasion, but yeah, for an artist to be poor is less bad than for other people. We don't like poor people in general. No, it's not pleasant to be with poor people. But in the case of artists, it's a bit different. It's so I wouldn't call it a privilege, but at least it's not as bad as it looks. Okay, well, let's not get involved. Yeah, just a few. It's all still a little bit to do with this bohemian idea, so maybe it's changing very much now. But I talked about the fact that you are, you like, when there comes more money, and you will probably spend less hours in a second job, or spend it on a new camera or whatever. But at the same time, you can also be more careless with money, or even squander it. So that's really the bohemian idea. So yeah, you can be reckless with money, which is in a way also a privilege. And in that sense, you're different than a pop star, strangely enough. They have to be serious about money. They have to reinvest it, go into a business or whatever. While Lucian Freud and Francis Bacon and people like that, they just, you know, they sold a painting, and within a week they had gambled all the money away. So it's, again, some sort of strange relationship with money. You have to get rid of it. It's dangerous or whatever. Yeah. Okay. Maybe if we have extra time, remind me to talk about the symbolic value of money in the case of artists and other groups. But let's just go. The triangle. I have this idea, I like to call it an art period. So the high prestige of art, the high value, symbolic value of art is not of all times. And it will also not remain as high as it is now. If it doesn't go down in the next 20 years, it will be later. But nothing lasts forever, and also not this high prestige of the arts. I think that it's this period in which art is so central in society, has so much value, also on people, among people who don't like arts. It's still in their mind, it's still loaded with value. I give examples of that in a minute. I think that's started so around from 1800 onwards, and maybe the peak is around 1950 or something like that. But yes, our respect for art, respect is the proper word, I would say, has increased very much during that period, and it's still very high. And it's a respect which, so in this, it's also before 1800s, there was already gradually starting an idea of the arts, but it wasn't very common yet. And going back a little bit further, there were no the arts. The arts also included military arts, all sorts of sciences. So the arts didn't stand out yet. There was not a collective noun arts, which includes music, painting, poetry, literature. So it's telling that, first it's telling that the arts, as we know them now, have been able to monopolize the term art, and the others have to have an extra adjective, military art or popular art is not art. Art without popular is something else, so that's telling in itself. Also of the respect which is increasing. And I don't know what else I wanted to say. So yeah, what's important is that the respect for specific arts, like for music by Bach or a painting by Rembrandt, immediately calls forward a respect for art general. So for high art. If you're in a concert with Bach music, you get excited about Bach, but also about art. You're celebrating art. Well, if you're in a pop concert, well, we had some sort of a dispute about that. I would say, no, you like, maybe the pop musician may be very sacred or whatever, you look up to him, but you don't connect him with the world of art. That's the proper thing, the world of art. So Bach and being in the classical concert hall is connecting with the world of art here as well, especially in a room like this, very white and pure. You're connected with the world of art. While in a shop with design sort of things, you don't, maybe nowadays a little bit. But especially in pop music, there is a separation, a boundary between art and popular art or entertainment. Okay. What's changed around? I would have to be shorter, I think. Well, first of all, of course, art was no longer, the first thing about art was no longer that it was functional or instrumental. The prestige of art went very much. Of course, people like Michelangelo and those people already were esteemed pretty much, but they were rather exceptions than the average visual artist. And they were admired is actually the right word, because of their work, the work itself, not of their person, and also because of their mastership. They were very good in their work, so they were not yet, it's only in hindsight that we project on them that they express themselves, their inner being, but in those days that was not an issue, they were just very good. And that changed around 1800 or in the period after that. The separation between art and artists sort of becomes less strong. The artwork is the artist and the artist is his work, and in both he sort of expresses himself. And again, the prestige of artists went up very much. Like Haydn was still a servant. He was recognized a bit as a very good composer, but he still had to eat with the servants. Well, that's very different now. Functionality at the French court. Yeah, art was very much decoration for the intercourse among people, very delicate sort of interaction, and then art was a decor, you could say, for a refined intercourse. Okay, so I would argue, but now I have to be really much shorter, that from 1800 onwards, the society becomes much more prosperous. Capitalism takes on, and very successfully. And there is, but it's also a disenchantment, as Weber would say, and rationalization. The society is becoming very much more rational. People are becoming rather functions than people who belong to a collective, and so there's this need to be an individual, which didn't exist so much before. You were sort of naturally part of a community, but now you become scattered. You get to specialize in industry or whatever, and so there's a need to know who am I, who is my true self. And I think the esteem of the arts has to do with this new development. The artist is somebody who can give proof of the fact that he is an individual being, an authentic being, and he proves it in his work, while everybody else can't. Even, of course, the meaning of authenticity is changing very much at the moment, and that's in itself interesting, but still, if Karel Appel dies, when he died, there were no more new Appel paintings. Well, if the director of a CEO of a big firm dies, the next day there's another one who replaces him, who has a slightly different style, but the whole machine goes on, and the cars are still produced, and they still are called Ford or whatever. So up to the present day, they make a difference between artists and other people, even though they do all sorts of creative work. Okay, and that is in a nutshell why I would think the prestige of art has gone up so much, and why it's so important for us. And in a way we're searching for ourselves, especially for instance in romantic music. You try to get to your inner self. Again, it's changing, but maybe not fundamentally. Even in contemporary art, I think there's still attention for the expression of the artist. The artist is still a little bit the work and the other way. Even though we like to deny that, I think it still matters. Okay, well, just a few. Art has goodness in this period. So it's stereotypes of art which are infused with emotion. Well, you can read it, art is beauty, it enriches. And then actually the negative things are, first I ought to go more often. That's to the museum. And the very fact that people say that, well, I don't, but yes, I ought to go more often. It's already showing that there's emotion, and there must be something special there in that museum, otherwise people wouldn't say that. And they do it in an apologetic way. So, it's, I'm stupid, I should go more often, but I don't. And if you say my daughter of 6 could do the same, this Karel Appel painting, it's the sort of anger or emotion is again telling of the high value of art. If it would be just, well, any other object, you wouldn't care about it. But now it's suddenly necessary to say, oh, my daughter of 6 could do the same. And then, well, artists have goodness, I would say, well, creative, being creative, authentic. They realize themselves. Self-realization is, of course, still a very important thing, which draws people to the art academies. Even though it seems that we could, if you think about it, you could realize yourself probably just as much or just as little in any other profession. It's still there. And then again, oh no, I'm not creative. So it would be presumptuous to say I'm creative if you're doing design or something which is very creative, but still, okay. And then, well, what we shouldn't forget about all this, even, Duchamp and all those people, they signed, or the signature, or even the absence of the signature is a signature, and the signature matters. So it's still the person who, and that also applies to the most contemporary art, I would say. So we still believe that there's something of the artist in the work. Yes. Now I have to talk, before I move to this, I have to talk a little bit more about art and entertainment. In this historic notion of an art period, the last 2 centuries, let's say, I think what is very essential is that there became a split between entertainment and art. And it's still important to maintain that boundary. It's becoming harder and harder, but I think museums, etc., are doing the best they can to maintain it, even when they let in fashion and that sort of thing. They always have to legitimize it. But it's done with an art intention or something like that. So yeah, we're trying to maintain it, and it's essential. It's essential for the prestige, for the high value of art. If you wouldn't be able to maintain it, the value is bound to go down. So that's why I think the boundary between art and entertainment is important, and became established in the first half of the 19th century, and actually very clearly in the United States, I would say. In Europe, it was more gradually aristocratic art moved into bourgeois hands, and there was no need to make so clear that it's not entertainment. But in the United States, without this tradition of aristocratic art, it was a big mixture, and it was commercial people, commercial entrepreneurs who mixed what we now call art and entertainment. It was all came in the same shows, like Shakespeare was brought in the same show as circus acts, or paintings were shown in, together with freak sort of artifacts, and for the commercial people, it wasn't of no interest whether they brought art separately or not. And if the audience wanted to come to combinations, well, let them have it. But if you want to derive distinction from art, and that was in those days increasingly European art that had more standing than, for instance, the aristocratic European art, more than, for instance, the folk art, which was brought in by the Irish people and all sorts of ethnic groups. You had to get it separate, so there were actually 3 operations. One was classification, the other insulation, and the third was framing, I would say. So classification is make completely, absolutely clear to the new bourgeois, also the coming up bourgeois, and later on the working class, this is art and this is entertainment. And don't get them mixed up. And they better be aware that we have art in other buildings than entertainment. And it lasts to the present day, maybe less so in America, but pop concerts are not played in concert halls and the other way. So there's a physical insulation, but also temporal isolation. You're not doing the 2 things in the same show. And not all bourgeois were happy with that. Some protested when it became more and more separate. Or when, and that's the framing, when you had to have a special etiquette for high art things. Like when it became, it was no longer allowed to smoke cigars in the concert hall. There were serious articles in the press, but yes, the high art people won. And so that's how we came with the present situation. What was the motive? I think it was really to establish this bourgeois group in Europe as the continuation of the aristocratic people, and here as a special class. But it was not just distinction, it was also education to a degree. So it has two sides to it. Keeping the group small on the one hand, and you have much prestige, but when the group is too small, you have too little basis. So sometimes you have to supplement by getting the lower bourgeois also civilized. And at some stage it was also civilizing the common man, because there was fear of the common man who had no proper, was unruly and even revolutionary sometimes. So actually it were the social democrats who were very much trying to educate the masses. And in the 20th century, not altogether successful as far as high art is concerned, but still, it's explainable. Okay. Yeah, I should talk a little. Okay. Well, this has to do with the attitudes of artists. That is what I call the denial of the economy. So, again, in the United States, it was very clear they had to get out these commercial people, these entrepreneurs who were commercially oriented, because they didn't distinguish between art and entertainment. So, in a way, the bourgeois groups who grown rich through commerce in this area, in the area of art, they didn't want commerce. And again, it lasts to the present day. If you go into a gallery, you don't see price tags. And anyway, it's a sort of an empty space. Here they have the computers on the side. You could even have a curtain in front of them. In some galleries they would have that, or in a separate room. So the place where there is administration, commerce, and that sort of thing. People are on the phone in a gallery, trading or whatever. It has to physically be separate from their artists. That's, you could call it the denial of the economy. Price tags. When I get a collector in my studio, we talk about art and how important art is and how wonderful my art is. And then there's the moment we have to get to a deal. And we separate it very much. Suddenly we start to talk about selling and prices, and if they're not too high, and we negotiate a bit, and hopefully there's a deal. And the moment the deal is there, no more money talk, nothing about money. It's again about the importance of art and art for living and culture. So here as well, it's a separation of commerce and art. Okay, and for instance, when I say, why are there no price tags? It's a shop like any other shop. They want to sell. The use of the word shop is already a little bit, maybe not annoying, but it's special. Why should we use the word shop? This is no shop. Oh after all, it's a shop. So words like shop and consumption, in my writing I use often the word consumption, and sometimes, for me it's become a second nature, but people say, at first I don't like this word, consumption. I call it consumption, and then afterwards, indeed it's consumption. So it tells how much this denial of the economy is sort of built into us. And I think it's still important. It's less so that we do not allow commercial thinking anymore. So indeed these websites are very much promoted. And also in art education. Nowadays we say, well, yes, we should prepare artists for the market. So we have special curricula in cultural entrepreneurship, maybe a bit of marketing. And that's the difference with the past. In the past you just had to find out for yourself. So it's more in the open. That's already a difference, but I'm not so sure of it, if it's already that fundamental. Because there again, it seems to be two worlds. There's on the one side there are these curricula, and the other side can say, we're taking care of that, because in this separate world, we are working on it. But in my own work, the teachers, etc., it's all about new media. We don't care if there's a market for new media. So it's about art, real art, autonomy. So don't think in terms of, can I sell it, or is there a market for it? Because that's not what interests us. That's the other department within the art academy. So it's still a separation. And it's a long tradition. It's almost like the art part provokes, the market demands. It's like when I was in art school, everybody was starting to make huge paintings. Well, many the older people probably remember. There were 5 by 6 meters. And in those days, musea were interested in those big paintings, and some collectors with very big houses were interested in it. But so all the attention went there, and if you wanted to orient yourself on the art world, you would probably, it could make sense to work in that. But only for a very, very few students. If everybody's doing that, they have a problem because there's no market for these big things. And it's like, it's as if the art world wants to say, well, we don't care. We almost purposely go for something for which there's no market. Like the new media thing nowadays, well, of course it's great. And there could be a market if you were prepared to work together with, popular culture and everything, or design, or all that. But that's not what they're trained in. They're trained to do very typical sort of new media art, which is, again, artistically very interesting, but only the market is very small. You don't need to educate thousands and thousands of people in this particular form of new media art. Okay, so that's about this split and denial of the commerce and market. Artist attitudes, well, of course this was already about artist attitudes, teachers' attitudes. You learn that it's about autonomy, and the only thing that matters is to be as autonomous as possible, given constraints, because there are always constraints. And for instance, performing arts, yes, they can be quite strict, the constraints. So your artists are aware of the constraints, but they want to maximize autonomy. And I think that's the most typical for artist attitudes. I also call it an art ethos. So it's good to be singular. That's still this sort of thing of authenticity, expressiveness. You're not a group. No, your individual being is what matters. Being singular, extraordinary, special, all that sort of thing. We talked about that. Commerce is bad. Entertainment is bad. So it's not for money, but money is not the only thing. Money stands for a whole area of aims which are not allowed. Ultimately, you're also not allowed to go for peer recognition. You do, of course, but it shouldn't be the goal. The goal is art. It's still an art for art's sake. So it's not about rewards, but about art. And the artist's intention is to be it's not the practice, of course. And orienting yourself on the demands of the art world is, of course, not as bad as being after money. But ultimately, it's not. I don't know. Forget about what's there. So success can also be suspect. Maybe not as much nowadays as before, but still, if an artist has become successful, for instance, by orienting himself too much on the markets, on demands, on attention, and he gets successful very quickly, or maybe in between. Very quickly can be okay, but rather quick, then it's suspect, and people may say, maybe he's not a good artist. So success is okay, but you mustn't have been after it. It must be something that comes up from the air, and then it's okay. And then you, in some strange way, you even deserve it. Well, we talked about that. Success shouldn't be shown in the common ways like pop stars would do. It should bring about a very important change in lifestyle. Maybe with very young artists or people like Damien Hirst, it's different, but then they're very good in turning, following incentives like attention, like any other popular artist, at the same time into a form of art. So then it becomes a little bit more acceptable. competing after money, or, well, ever since Warhol, you know these mechanisms. Yeah, so we make it very difficult for artists. On the one hand, we have to conform, yeah, by living up to this modernist tradition of singularity. But how can you be singular when you have to conform? Yeah? So that's already a very problematic situation we put artists in. And again, this is already a bit sort of the chapter of suffering, because it's not easy, these very hard demands. You have to be very innovative nowadays as a contemporary artist. So personal variations on the theme were quite normal still in the 19th century, classical art, and to a degree also later on. So you could be expressive in your small variations, and in that sense live up to the demands of the art period, this expressiveness. But more and more, you have to be innovative, and the expression must be in the innovation itself. So not in the variation, but in the innovation. And now it's even becoming like any artist has to start from scrap. Well, not really, of course, but has to find a grammar of its own. And that's, of course, over-asking, I would say. And so it doesn't lead always to very interesting results. But that's my personal. My thesis would be that also in postmodernism, it's still expressive singularity remains important. But maybe that's another story. Okay, I want to go to what I would call the Wild West economy. So we would expect that a sector which is so anti-commerce, would like the whole thing to appear like it's like gifts and a gift economy, would be very gentle. But the opposite is the case. I would say it calls forward this anti-commercial attitudes, actually a kind of Wild West economy, and that's where we're getting closer to W.A.G.E and its purposes. It's always the end justifies the means, and the end is great art, and so as long as you put your activities in the service of art, or you believe you're doing that, any means is allowed. And it leads to extreme competitiveness, and also to on the level of individual artists, very much so. There's little solidarity among artists, also on the level of galleries, and also on the level of institutions. It's so important that what we're doing, we don't have to stick to normal business rules. Because business is not a matter of laws and that sort of thing. It's very much a matter also of trust. Well, if you behave properly, I will behave properly as well. But if it's all about yourself, it's sort of an ethnocentrism, and then again, it's not really about yourself because it's of arts, but what you have to express yourself, so you have an obligation to get your work across, anything is allowed. And I'll just give one example, because it's there was you sometimes, even in the art world, you have some sort of rules of proper behavior, like galleries, commercial galleries. So that's probably where you wouldn't expect it, but in art fairs, they have to pay rent for their stall, and what is normal is that you don't let your artists pay part of the rent. You give them the 50% as is normal, but you don't let them pay part of. So you take the risk of not selling. That's the business risk, which is normal in any other situation as well. And they live up to it, but not all. There are always quite a few who don't. And I remember it especially well because my gallery owner suggested to me, very sort of in a very indirect way, well, maybe we could put you up in a separate stall, but yes, it's quite risky, so could you not take part of the risk, and then I won't take the commission for the first so many. Well, not so. It probably happens everywhere a little, but I didn't hesitate a moment. I immediately said, yeah, this is good for my career, and even if I lose money, and it was good for my career. But so again, we are just looking for ourselves for how can I promote my art, because I'm important and I could be this genius, and I have to do anything possible to get as far as possible. Yeah? And that's all in the name of arts. So it's really the end justifies. Just one more example. It's very silly, but again, it's telling. Some 10 years ago, yeah, sometime maybe not as long, but you got all these mailings by all sorts of institutions have email mailings to a large group, and one way or another you get on a list, and then increasingly it became possible to unsubscribe. Almost everywhere, almost any serious institution would have a possibility to very easily unsubscribe. Push a button and two more and you're out of the system. Except for art institutions. Like they're above the law, they're special. And okay, now it has changed. I'm quite sure that this club is okay. Maybe it could be part of the certification, I don't know. But yes, it's telling how all the time you put yourself more or less outside the rules, also the normal rules of commerce. Okay, and yeah, and well, that's also part of the problem of unionizing. In the arts, if you go along with the others, if you make a union, it is sooner or later a sign of mediocrity. If you're really good, or you want to be good, or you want to have a chance to get your message across, you shouldn't unionize, you shouldn't put yourself at the same level as the others. So again, extreme competitiveness. A few moments. Okay, we won't go into suffering. Okay, just yeah, maybe that's a good point to sort of close. That's in this Wild West economy, because that's really where we are now. Is the art world changing so much that they're ready for a group like W.A.G.E? Is it really a matter of a very small step, or could you even think about unionizing? How much is changing? I think there is quite a bit happening just now, and in part it may be even yeah, not that wonderful, in the sense that the high value, the highest time of art may go down. In countries like the Netherlands, you can now discuss cuts in subsidies without being a barbarian, yeah? Which is quite a dramatic change. So it's not natural to have respect for art, and that respect should go so far that you can't even talk about subsidies. So there are things changing, and maybe, yeah, some degree of professionalization. Yeah, let's get to recommendation. I would call it professionalization. So, yeah, some new attitudes in the arts, less egocentric, and yeah, just have, because that's something we should remember. The willingness to work for very low incomes is in a way also asocial. Yeah, it looks as if you're helping art, it's as if you're supporting art, giving to art, but in a way it's making it difficult for all the others. So have some standard. I'm not prepared to work for ridiculous low incomes. Could be a step forward, or it's a normalization, let's say it that way. And then, yeah, that's clear, the certifications and unionizing. Okay, let's leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans.
I was expecting somebody else to say, this is it.
Oh, that wasn't the right flag. So we had a Q&A planned. I don't know if people have questions for Hans. We can do that. But I also want to let you know that we have some free soup in the back. May not feed everyone here, but we got hopefully enough to give everyone a little something. And so we're going to take a sustenance social break, and then we're going to come back. And W.A.G.E would like to really discuss a few questions and get some feedback on this proposal for this collaboration that we're entering into with Artispace and what it would mean to develop certification, and what people's needs, desires, questions, fears are around that. So it's really important if you have the energy to stay and let us know what you're thinking. But maybe we can move into a little Q&A if anyone has. I'll let Hans lead this.
So I do want to ask you about the question of government subsidies, because I read your book because W.A.G.E recommended it, and then I found out that the book is basically this very strong and extreme argument that any form of support of artists by the government or outside of the art market is bad and simply encourages more artists to enter and therefore drives down wages for everybody. It's almost like what economists used to argue about poor people, that if you support them at all, then they just breed, and then you just have to support more poor people. So I guess I don't see W.A.G.E is for a form of subsidy. I mean, they're for having museums and nonprofits pay artists for their work. So I just would like you to, if you agree with that, if you have a criticism of it, like to voice it, and if you've changed your mind, then I'd like to hear it.
Okay, no, I think what W.A.G.E is doing is really very little to do with the idea of support, or the only support I could think of actually is asking the government for a starting subsidy to get this thing going. You need some organization or maybe some other fund. So temporary interventions may not be bad at all, to get a market to work properly, instead of what I would call a Wild West market. In general, subsidies, it's partly the symbolic value of subsidies, so it's very straightforward, almost Malthusian reasoning. Maybe I wouldn't emphasize that as much as I do in the book, although even in the book it's not the most important thing, but yeah, many people take that out of the book, which is a problem for me now. Yes, the symbolic value of subsidies, and especially subsidies which go straight to artists, which is quite common in Europe, has I think it gives the wrong signal. And anyway, subsidies are always, until recently, they were defended by artists are so poor, we have to raise their income. And I think that's just is not true. It doesn't raise income. That's proven, and so then it's cover up for other motives. And then I would say, well, why not be clear about what you really want, why you want to do this. So that's my reason. But I would now more emphasize the symbolic working of subsidy. You have a very different system with your tax rebates for people who support art, which is also a form of subsidy, but that's with advantages and disadvantages, but that's a different story. But don't forget that you also support art very much. If you work it out in numbers, some people have done that. The United States more or less subsidize art as much as European countries.
Would you argue that if people do begin to fight for higher wages as artists, it would speed up the decrease of society's value of art?
Yeah. I think, well, if you do it and you're successful, then there would be a relationship. You can only be successful if society is ready in letting the value of art go down. But then again, it will also speed up. It's both ways. But for instance, in the 60s, there was also this process of what you could call professionalization or re-professionalization through unions. I don't know about the United States, but in Holland and other countries, there was a real effort to get artist unions going, more or less as other unions, claim rates and all that sort of thing, but it didn't work. Society wasn't ready for it, artists weren't ready for it, and it was sort of counterproductive. Although that's not only limited to the arts unions, more generally it tended to be conservative. And also nowadays, I don't know if you should work with memberships or maybe it's more a matter of Facebook and that sort of connections and getting a buzz and actions that are not over-regulated. It's not only a matter of artists who are too individually oriented, it's also a bit against the times.
Hi, thank you for your speech, and I was wondering, I just was curious about your opinion. This book was written in 2001, was it? And it was written from a European perspective, which I understand because you're Dutch, that's natural. In the United States, we're now living in a culture where approximately 50% of the people in the country are living at the poverty level. And I was wondering about just your opinion of the poor artist living within a country where almost the majority of people are poor at this point.
Yes. It's natural that you make the relationship, and it's also done, strangely enough, not only in the direction of poor people, there's something common with other poor people, but also even at the moment there's a tendency among Marxist people to say artists are the sort of forefront of the precarious worker. So in due time, also the lawyer is becoming, his situation in capitalism is becoming more and more insecure, and especially all these new creative cultural industry people are moving into a precarious state. I think you have to be very careful by saying artists are completely comparable with other precarious workers or completely comparable with poor people. But as Alison mentioned today, yeah, maybe when it comes to strategies to improve your situation, yeah, you could learn from one another. But don't forget those parents. They're always in the back of your mind as an artist. Well, no, I'm generalizing again because there are many artists who don't have well-educated and rich parents, but on average it makes a difference. And yeah, then your situation is just not the same as those of people who have been poor for generations, and you can't think in their way. And so, yeah, that would be my answer.
Hi, Hans. I just want to give two provocations about unions and not against them. One is that unions are concessions, that in most cases, like in the US in the 30s, the unions were part of a deal, the New Deal, which was a deal that was made as a concession so people wouldn't turn to communism. In France, it's the Commune. The other thing is that unions are failures, or artist unions are failures. As far as I know, every artist union, with the exception of the W.A.G.E period, has failed. So I just think if we're going to talk about unions, then we have to become experts in failure. And I just want to know what you think about that.
Well, it's anyway good to be aware that there's this side to the thing. I'm not an expert on it. And I have to think about it. I was in a meeting of, well, you were there, and in another meeting of Art and Labor Group, and set me thinking, maybe it could be the right moment to do more in the direction of unionizing. Let's try to find modern ways. Use Facebook and not because if you look at the unions which went before, they are good examples in many ways, but don't copy them because it's just a different age. So you have to bind people together in another way, and so even it's no good if there are only 2 or 3 very successful artists who are joining. There are always only 2 or 3. Like even Occupy Wall Street, there are some rich people who feel, so that's not good enough. So if you want to get a larger community in which mediocre is not even a good word, it's unsuccessful artists, because their work can be wonderful, but for one reason or another they're not successful. If you want to combine them with, or not get the stamp of failures, there must be some sort of loose thing which bind people together, an enthusiasm. And for a long time, unions were sort of killing enthusiasm for all sorts of reasons, too many regulations or whatever. So you have to be very inventive, but why not? It's certainly worth trying. And,
I wonder if you don't have a somewhat idealistic view of the artist, and not only the artist, of the worker. I mean, I think artists and workers in general, in this generation and the future, are all going to be freelancers, and the days of 40-year corporate job of any kind are over. And I think we're dealing with a very different kind of situation for the contemporary artist than the kind of historical one you described.
Well, what is new is, of course, that I'm not talking about performing artists, about creative artists. They've been freelancers for a long time. So what is new is that there are going to be so many more freelancers who are not artists. And they can be in the creative industries, but also outside. It's becoming very profitable for capitalists to employ temporary people who are almost self-employed or self-employed. So that makes you think, and so I can understand that these Marxists are really looking at artists as forerunners of a new situation and want to learn from it, which is a good idea. But again, don't forget that the situation of the artist is different. And if artists are exploited, they are also exploited within a different system than creative workers generally or workers generally. Until now, it may change in the future. But don't even within the arts, we always tend to turn them into one group with one problem. Well, they're very different groups, and some people profit from the poverty of others. Some artists profit from the poverty of others. Because it's also partly because there's so many artists poor that the prestige can remain so high. So it's a different economy, but there are also getting more and more similarities.
Hi, God, I almost don't know where to begin. I thought so much of what you said was problematic. But just a couple of things. I think that, this characterization of the dancer models that were greedy because they wanted to make a living, that sort of belied an attitude in general that you had about artists wanting to be paid well for their work. The idea that no artists would be immigrants or children of immigrants also struck me as kind of just unbelievably ill-spoken. The oversimplification of being poor and happy or poor and miserable. That it's not pleasant to be around poor people, but it's not so bad for artists. There was a kind of assumption of sameness that we're all on the same page here that I also found really problematic. Also something about that music is, like Bach is art, but pop music's not. You know, I mean, I'm not even going to start listing the bands, you know, from punk rock forwards that, you know, that's not true of. This idea of the period of respect for art beginning in 1800, I mean, that basically leaves out the entire Renaissance and pretty much all the masters of Europe, like, you know, from Vermeer and Rembrandt and everybody else. And maybe just to talk about something productively, because that was just kind of a list of the things that jumped out and made my skin crawl. One of the really important differences between a kind of European model that you talk about here, which is already a kind of a 10-year-old model because subsidies are being taken apart in Europe too, is that here in the United States, even those of us that make a living as artists within this kind of problematic commercial system, we don't have access to a lot of the social network that's available in Europe. So we're kind of by default already working in different models to just get healthcare. Like a number of us get our healthcare by belonging to things like the Freelancers Union. So, okay, I'm getting there. Sorry if that's annoying to you. But I guess I could ask a productive question, like how do you see that as different? Like in Europe, artists like all other workers already have healthcare and we don't have healthcare. So could you maybe respond to that?
Well, in that respect, just I'll get to your first remarks very quickly. But the last thing, yes, you're perfectly right. The artists are better off in Europe in that respect, but that doesn't. Their health care is generally a matter of all workers having more health care. It's not because they are artists. They're not. In some countries maybe it might be different, but in most European countries, you're not having access to health care because you're an artist. It's because you're in a certain income group or a labor situation or whatever. So it's general rules which differ between the United States and Europe. And maybe our rules are better, I don't know. Probably, I would say so in this respect. With all the other things, like my models being greedy, immigrants being underrepresented, represented, well, for instance, being underrepresented, that's a fact. It's not that I say it's good. On the contrary, I would say it's very bad, and it tells something about the art world or other things. So, and my models being greedy, of course they are not greedy, otherwise they wouldn't start to spend the money they get from, well, from me actually, not on consumption, but on being able to do their profession. So don't misunderstand me. I use these words maybe a bit provocatively, but not to put people down. On the contrary, you don't get an emotional load in them which I don't want to put in them, and I never did, as far as I can say. Okay.
I'm not sure how relevant it is to some of your discussion, but I wonder how you factored in the secondary market and how, as of, for the last 10 years, profits in these auction houses and stuff have been astronomical. And in a lot of ways, it doesn't actually ever get back to the artists themselves or the estate of the artist.
Maybe I don't have much to say about these very high prices, and I can imagine that it raises anger among artists, yeah? Because again, society puts art on a food stall, some collectors are willing to spend lots of money, and often after the artist doesn't, even the successful artist doesn't profit anymore from it. But then again, successful artists, yeah, it's true, some are actually successful, but don't see much of the sales. certainly not in the secondary market when it goes up, but most of them are not very bad off. If in the secondary market you get these huge prices, yeah, it's sad that it goes to other people, but they're usually the artists who have a reasonably good standard of living. But it's making angry more generally, I would say. Yeah, that art is, yeah, in a way you feel exploited, I would say, even more because of all this luxury and all the fuss about it as well. It's also phony. But in that sense, I don't care so much about that side of the arts. Because it's also exists in popular art, in sports, etc. It's not really telling so much about what's happening on the floor. Maybe that's what I could say about it.
So that would be, I think that's good time to stop the Q&A. Thanks Hans again, and thanks everyone for listening. And we're going to have a 30-minute social break, and then we're going to W.A.G.E is going to rearrange the room a bit, and we'll have an open discussion about some of these issues and self-realizations. Thanks again.
Tonight is also because W.A.G.E, I'm just going to give a brief history here, which is that W.A.G.E has been working since 2008 to advocate for artist fees. It's a pretty simple, very novel task. And one of the things we did in trying to get to that was we put out a survey like a year and a half, 2 years ago. And to start to get some actual information about, are artists being paid, how much are they being paid, when are they not being paid, what is the condition that exists. And in doing that, one of the things that occurred from that is we got, in particular, a response from Artist Space saying, hey, wait a minute, we pay artist fees, we're interested in, you guys are really trying to gather information about this, maybe the plan to just move forward and actualize putting something in motion. And one of the things that that has been floating around as an idea for how W.A.G.E can become not just, let's say, a consciousness-raising group, which I think is what we've done for several years, but become sort of an activist group / nonprofit, which is actually where we're at this moment. We're establishing ourselves as a nonprofit so that we can provide an actual service for the arts community. The service we are proposing to offer the arts community is W.A.G.E certification. W.A.G.E certification is an idea that art institutions would come to us to become certified if they met certain prerequisites, proving that they pay expenses plus artist fees. And that's a very broad and general way of stating what the goal is, but I think well, when Artist Space sort of came to us and was like, well, we'll consider, we'd like to talk to you further, we'd like to open our books to you, we'd like to have a really transparent dialogue about what it would mean to become certified. It was very clear that we needed a lot of voices and understanding, well, what does the arts community really want, what do they need. And so we have 3 really basic questions that we came up with tonight. We just want really very general and open feedback about. And there's questions. We would like to propose the 3 questions and see what we get in response, and also whatever comes up for people in terms of a larger dialogue or questions about
what's useful about WAGE, what's useful about WAGE certification, what's problematic, like what questions you have. It's kind of like we wanted to have a space that we can talk about it. Okay. So these are the kind of very general questions we came up with, and so there's just an interest in understanding if people have had experience with receiving artist fees. When we say artist fees, we mean you've worked with an institution, your exhibition is covered, its cost, and you receive some nominal fee. Our interest in fees is that a nonprofit institution seeks grants to facilitate the running of the institution based on the fact that they are an educational and cultural institution. The educational and cultural institution that they provide is based on the fact that there are many people working for them, the staff, the people that run it, but also what we like to think about is that the artist that's invited in by the institution is a cultural worker and or educator in that economic structure. But rarely is the artist considered as part of that labor force that makes the thing run. And we're not advocating inherently, although we can discuss this tonight if people have different ideas, for a hourly wage. We think that there's kind of potentially an impractical, and it might be a little impractical to think about arts labor as an hourly wage because there's, as we all know, something can take 5 minutes but took 5 years of experience and thinking to develop. And the hourly labor wage relationship within the arts is complicated to enumerate. And that's where artist fees, so our standardized artist fees start to seem like a viable potential option for a kind of compensation in that economic exchange. So our proposal has always sort of been that fees are a potential idea that makes sense. Other ideas, totally. We like to know what you think about that as a proposal. And so just one thing is to get some sense from the group is what your experiences with artist fees are. Have you received them? Have you never received them? And is there a benefit? Have you ever experienced like a benefit in receiving artist fees? Is there? Do you find that there could potentially be a function for you as an artist in receiving that? The other question is, if fees were established, what would you expect? What are your expectations of WAGE certification? This is very broad. You've put some really broad stuff on the table. So, and this is, I guess, this is a sense of we're all just getting familiar with what the potential of this could be. And I think we assume everyone has very different experiences in the arts, and that there's issues that might be very personal to people about things that they would hope or expect that would be quantified in that, and we want to know if there's ideas of things or not. And then the last one is, does anyone oppose the idea of artist fees, and why? We want to make sure that there's enough spaces here, so, why we shouldn't be doing this. If that's something we should be doing. And then I think we'd like it also to be open if there's just questions that other people want to put on the table. Does anyone want to, so I think let's start with your personal experiences with artist fees. I don't know if anyone has got. Do you want to do Mike? Good with talking.
I think I can.
Yeah.
I think I can project. Is that okay for everybody?
Yeah.
And I was going to ask people to do this, so I'll just do it. I'm Nayland Blake,
Yes.
And now I really feel like an old dude because I'm a little bit confused about the proposal, but to just dive in, I have received artist fees, and I received them initially in the context of working with organizations that were part of something called the National Association of Artists Organizations. So, starting in the 70s with the rise of artist-run organizations, of which Artist Space is one, and I think one of the reasons why Artist Space came to you and said, oh, well, we give artist fees, is because for them to be a member of this umbrella organization that was a national organization of nonprofit, run by artist organizations, they had to give fees as part of their structure. That was one of the things, in order to be the national board of that organization, in order to recognize you as a member of that organization, you had to give a certain percentage of your operating budget to artists in a flat fee as a way of providing support. And so I say that I feel like an old dude because it seems weird to me that whole, this is to me really indicative of how much has been rolled back in the intervening decades, because that organization was the prime information organ for the National Endowment for the Arts and for state arts councils as well. It was the intermediary that received funding from those, but also provided information about artists' working habits and artists in localities throughout the 50 states. So it's weird to me to think like, wait, okay, so all this work has somehow been lost or become obscured in some way. I really applaud the effort, but I'm also not clear on who's going to be paying these fees. Is the idea that this is nonprofits that are going to come to you, or museums and as a subset of nonprofits? And I think that that's the thing that might be a little bit confusing for people to sort out. But everyone meaning what? Commercial galleries? I mean, that's what I'm not clear on. If you just clarify that.
I think the way WAGE is proceeding, and again, this is up for discussion, but is that it would be nonprofit institutions.
Okay.
So not commercial galleries specifically, because the commercial galleries are already engaged in a specific economic exchange, even though it may or may not be, equitable or fair. There's all kinds of issues that happen in the gallery system. But it's been in thinking in relation to institutions that are receiving funding to provide a service that's different than a commercial gallery does, and what it means, how your operating budget would be parsed. Is that?
Yeah, so it sounds in essence like rebuilding that infrastructure that was there with NAO. It sounds a little bit like what the project is like.
What happens?
The short answer is that it was defunded, and throughout the 90s, with the drive to privatization, the valuation of for-profit galleries over nonprofit artist-run spaces meant that the member organizations had less money and resources to contribute to the running of the umbrella organization, and then the NEA's funding cuts also hit that organization. So that's the short answer of what happened.
Was it a private organization or government?
No, it was a public it was a nonprofit artist-run organization. Its board consisted of artists. It was staffed by artists.
Right. It was based on membership, or it was member, like nonprofit members that
Right. Organizations and individual artists could also join it.
And so people would not show their, if it wasn't sort of certified by the overseas.
Right. They published a guide to national nonprofit artists run organizations, like exhibition spaces, residencies, other resources for artists. So they're a clearinghouse for information for individual artists, and then also an umbrella organization for nonprofit organizations.
So they had to pay fees in order to be part of it.
Yeah.
It's not dissimilar. I mean, this is voluntary, but so is that.
Yeah.
Just as someone who started showing after that, I'm John Powers. I do installation and sculpture. I have and get honoraria, etc. It hasn't really been a problem. I don't show out of town, and I don't. It's one of the things. Just draw a line in the sand. Inside town, like for the Brooklyn Museum or something. But I wanted to bring up two places where I see a real problem developing in town. Which one is?
In town, you mean Manhattan, or you mean?
I mean the city. I mean someplace where like they can come and pick something up in a truck, and it's not a big deal. It doesn't involve art movers. It involves somebody I can shake a hand with, versus going out of state, meeting somebody I don't know, having to have a contract, etc. It's just there's a different level in my mind to what I'm up to, and if I have to travel, which I usually do. So then honorarium becomes really important. Something that we are under pressure in town to do is to give money to to give work to nonprofits every year for their galas. I've stopped. I don't feel good about it. I'd like to see 50% given back to the artists, and that's something that would, like, you could pressure them.
Well, you could just ask for that. I mean,
No, actually, I'd like to see everybody do that and to be able to opt out. If you understand what I mean, I'd like to be able to say, no, I don't need that back. But I don't want to participate with organizations that have staff that are supportive of healthcare, etc., that are asking artists to give artists who are supporting them, all the things we've heard about. The second is the art prize is, I think, just this low dangling fruit, which is a $500,000 that goes to 16 artists, and 1,500 artists participate, totally unfunded. The artists are expected to drive there, to install, to be there for a week, to man their own spaces, with the hope of winning $200,000. Art Prize in Grand Rapids is globally the largest single purse given to the arts. And they don't fund artists coming to there at all. They expect them.
Like if they took a small percentage of that gift, then
very small.
funded.
Anyways, those are the two things I wanted to just say that like have been. I'd love for you guys to do this.
Do we want to take stack, like, or do people just feel like it's?
Are we okay with just open hand raising or? Okay. Okay, we got it. Hand raising. All right, go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I received artist fees a couple times, and the amounts have been very small. And maybe there's someone from Artist Space, you can correct me, but I recall getting maybe $100 or $200. This is 12 years ago. Whereas, the cost of framing my work was probably over $2,000. So I think that the value of the artist fee is largely symbolic. Even if it were to cover my material expenses for mounting a show, it doesn't come close to covering my studio rent for the year. I mean, you guys know this already. So, I was just back on the How Is My Dealing blog. I don't know how many of you have seen that, but I was checking out another gallery that was closed. A friend of mine has kind of had the rug pulled out from under him. And I think that one of the symbolic values of the artist fee could be the kind of peer pressure situation that could be exerted on institutions in the same way that blog hopefully exerts a little bit of pressure on galleries, in the sense that it could create more transparency and just kind of force them to declare themselves, and kind of position themselves in one way or another vis-a-vis their artists. I think that the biggest problem we have is lack of transparency and lack of communication and solidarity. You know, and that whole notion of, you know, gazillions of artists competing for, you know, the shows and the galleries and whatever is just very counterproductive to all of us, you know, and I think that if we share the information that we have, we can exert pressure. So I think that that's part of what's happening in that blog, and I think it would be great if W.A.G.E through your, you know, efforts could create similar, you know, maybe not so snitty and whatever, but basically a similar kind of peer pressure, so that institutions, because, you know, I work in an institution where, as far as I know, this hasn't even come up. Like, maybe it has, and maybe you can correct me because we work together at ICP. But I think that, you know, just the more people talk about it, the better, and the more pressure is put on institutions, the better. And, you know, I think that it's very strange. I feel very ambivalent because, on the one hand, my second job as the gentleman who was making his presentation earlier, you know, is within an institution, so I see how that runs from the inside. And then as an artist, I am often put in that position of, you know, delivering work for free. And I've had, you know, recently work, you know, with like a magazine offered to run my work portfolio of images, and when they asked for even just a symbolic fee, like literally $50 or $75, just to kind of compensate me for the time it would take me to process all the files and do all the emailing and stuff, they rescinded their offer. So, you know, not only did I have the fee kind of turned down, but I actually had, you know, the possibility of my work reproduced in this journal completely just like, you know, pulled back because I dared to ask. Right. So I just really think that the more transparency, the better.
Let me go this way. Or you got yours on. I've had very similar experiences of receiving artist fees, but they're very nominal for, you know, very extravagant installations or time-consuming projects. And usually it's institutions that are running on a on a very shoestring budget and are really struggling. And the thing about benefits, depending upon the integrity of that nonprofit, you know, they'll give an artist, you know, an opportunity to get a work in exchange for contributing a work for benefit, but not so many do that. Often the case, it's your ticket to attend the event. So, you know, however way you feel about that, you know, as it may, throw it on the floor. So, but I think that part of it has a lot to do with nonprofits all struggling also, but large nonprofits are not struggling. And I think if I recall on the W.A.G.E website, you've articulated that museums do not always present a fee. There's a tendency to talk about how they have a struggling budget even within the project. So maybe you could talk about that some more.
It's more about, oh yeah, there's a request for me to say your name. Sorry. And I'm making burns, by the way. I think I did say that. But
oh, my name?
Yeah.
Oh, Elaine Angelopoulos.
And I'm Marina, very good. Sorry, I forgot.
And so what you're asking a specific question.
Yeah, I might have been in the Creative Time presentation, or maybe on your website. There was some mention about museums, some museums, and I don't remember if they were named museums, who are not forthcoming with an artist fee. So I wondered if anyone in W.A.G.E could talk about that.
About specific?
Well, not specific, but to talk about museums. If there's a problem with museums not presenting, because obviously they have to create a budget.
This is a general tendency. This is also based on hearsay through many conversations with artists, but and part of why the survey was started, to kind of get some kind of more factual sense of if and what and how much of that is actually happening. But the sense from our personal experiences and experiences of the extended community is that there seems to be the higher the bigger the institution, and the bigger the budget, somehow there's less, seems to be less forthright relationship to a transparency of like offering an artist fee, or even if you ask for an artist fee, that they would even give you one.
But that was the function of the survey, was to gather information about this. But unfortunately, we gathered information. I mean, maybe a lot of people here took the survey, but it was delineated. We tried to name every single nonprofit in New York, including museums. And there was a category for other, in which another 100 were named. I mean, it was just infinite. So unfortunately, we didn't. I mean, I think it's interesting that actually we didn't get a lot of data from people who had shown in museums. Like, I find this to be a really interesting fact, because it means that people who are showing in museums who are potentially more successful have more at stake and are less interested in talking about fact. I mean, this is where this question of do some people oppose artist fees comes from, because there are people that don't think it makes sense. And we're really interested in hearing more about that. But we do know that, and we're going to release the results of the survey, like soon. We've had it analyzed by a data analyst, but we just need to present the information in an attractive way. But we do know that people are more likely to get paid fees for solo shows than group shows. So group shows are where artists tend to be screwed more,
I'm sorry, can I just add that we found out that essentially 58% of the respondents, all of the respondents, which is close to 1,000, did not receive any form of fee,
any form of payment,
or any form of compensation, even expense. So we're going to release the results, and that's for our hopefully our next presentation, which we'll update everyone on if you're on a mailing list.
But I think, the important thing to note about that number, and if that's the only number we get out of the survey, it's probably worthwhile, because, and I've said this before, so sorry to repeat myself, but having sat on a panel which was giving out funding, a government panel giving out funding for the arts, every single proposal I read said that these organizations were all going to be providing artist fees. That was just like, to speak to the point. But we also know through the survey that 60% of the time that is just not true. So the issue is, I think what we're interested in is from an institutional perspective, why does that happen? Why are artist fees the first thing to get cut? Because I think essentially we don't feel that institutions have, we feel that, I think nonprofits have its artists' best interest at heart. It's not actually intentionally to make artists' lives miserable, but why is it that that's the first thing that gets cut? And I kind of sense that it's because there's no framework for it. We don't even know what an artist fee should be, so then the tendency is to just ignore it. Hope it goes away.
Okay, we got a lot of.
Sorry, so that was.
Well, she was.
Yes.
I just want to say two things go here. We're going to have to come. Maybe we can come back.
No, that's
missing it.
I'll write it down.
No, go.
I just wanted to say like the difference between like money versus exposure. I mean, I've gotten artists from people, and then some museums say, we can't pay you, but we have a huge mailing list, and your name's showing out, and somehow that equals money in some way, which I don't get.
This is the common exchange. Yeah.
So, is there some kind of template that can be created? Because to me, if I want to hire a maid, I Google it, and it literally says to the T, to wipe the window seal, it costs this. For me to get out of my car and to come into your apartment, it costs this. For me the mileage from my house to you, it costs this. For me to care about you a little bit more and watch your dishes, it costs this. That'll be $500. And I got to a point where I was like, why am I not that person? Why am I not? Because I had to buy an outfit. I'm an opera singer, I'm not a visual artist. I come to these things and they're none of me. I'm usually the random. And opera singers don't really have a place. We're just all privileged or something. So I'm not really fitted for that either. So, but why do I not have an invoice? So, I start reading freelance books. Why am I not treated like a freelancer, a design person, a blogger? What is that? Why do I not have an invoice that says, I have to buy an outfit, I have to get my hair done, $75, at least. Just from that. I have to show up to your venue. I have to take the train. I need a cab when I get back. I need cough drops and water. I need to care about you. So that takes a lot of emotion. I have to emote my artwork for you. I have to have initiative and drive and like be all shiny and like meet people afterwards and then have tea and like engage. That would be $500, like flat for this 1 hour venue. And then I have to refuse people and say, you know, look on my website, this is my invoice, like a contractor, like a plumber.
Well, that's what the idea of this process is through the partnership with Artist Space, we're going to be formulating a fee schedule.
Yeah.
With the input of everybody here and who's going to be forthcoming to these events. That is the idea. But you know, even in Canada where artist fees are basically mandated, they're very clear that artist fees are, like I think Marina said, they're ultimately symbolic. Even if you had a solo show every single month for an entire year, you would not be able to cover your expenses. So it is still symbolic in that sense, but that's important. But it would be interesting to hear if people think that's not enough. Or should it be more? We got some hands going up.
Let's go here. Well, to that point of the $500, and to your point, I think there should just be a day rate, like a freelancer. I mean, I feel like WAGE could function for me in that way, that like, you know, anytime you have to go install something or spend the day at X museum, it's a given that you get $500 for that work.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So like I'm installing something right now, and I guessed that I would need 2 days for install, but then I ran into some technical issues. It was 3 days. Typical things that happen when, say, your install is a certain length. So if you're trying to regulate what that would be, do you feel like this idea that if I walk in the door any day in your institution, I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm just trying
I mean, I would treat it the way I treat design work, which is like give a quote, like this project was going to cost between $5,000 and $7,000, but I can't say there's got to be some openness there that it's possible that we may go over this amount, but the day rate is $500.
A nonprofit's budget is limited, so it prohibits that.
I know.
It means that they can't do certain things.
I know. I mean, I know I'm oversimplifying, but I just had an experience where if I had said that, they would have gone and raised extra money if I had said it up front, and they didn't.
Well, or they wouldn't have hired you to. They would have found somebody who could have done a show in less time. Because I've also experienced, you know, curators who won't show certain artists because they're too expensive for them to install, forget paying the artist to install. So then they're editing themselves creatively.
But is it it's not, because I work in fashion too, I have this whole thing about educating the customer. Like, is it the people who are funding the museums who need to be more deeply educated that they need to have extra money to pay the artists?
Yeah, they need to see it.
There was a wage proposal.
But there's a wage proposal on the table, which people can also think about, maybe talk about the next time, which was sensitivity trainings for board members, so that we can assign people to talk about their conditions similar to what you do in a corporate workplace. So that's something we're interested. Actually, I'm very interested in, which I hope to hear that program. The first program, but we're still. I think we should stay on track about the development of an artist fee schedule. It doesn't have to be regarding artist space, but that's the idea. And I think we're still in an order of
Yeah, let's keep.
Wait.
Really
We have to wait for
jumping
your
out
turn.
over here.
Who was next?
I'm going to move this way. Start here and then. Is that cool?
Love you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Josh Klein. I guess I have two things to say. One is, I think part of this is in response to talking about day rates and fees for artists. I think part of this has to do with the budgets that institutions have for projects, and often, and maybe something that WAGE could do would be to educate institutions or encourage institutions to budget, artist fees in from the get-go. because I feel like something that goes on with a lot of institutions is they try and do more than they're actually capable of. You know, this is true of like most nonprofits. They go a bit overboard with their programming, and their budgets are stretched really thin, and then in the end, they don't end up having money to give to artists. You know, and so if you encourage a model where, you know, fees for artists are assumed and built in from the get-go, you know, they will have safety budgets that would then cover extra days or cover other things, which is what other industries do in similar circumstances. They assume that people should be paid. And then the other thing that I wanted to say was actually, I think something else that WAGE could probably do, and this comes out of my experience with my day job. I work for Electronic Arts Intermix, EAI, which regularly negotiates with institutions on behalf of the artists that we represent and that we distribute. And you know, because there's this third party doing the negotiation, it's actually quite easy to get institutions to pay like a royalty to the artist, because it's just, you know, in order to get like the work by John Baldessari or Martha Rosler or like Ryan Treeparton or whoever, they have to pay the set rate, which includes a royalty for the artist every time. And you know, what we found is almost always like museums have, you know, if they want to show the work, they will pay they'll pay it.
So do you think WAGE can function better, or that wage certification would not be part of it, or that one of the other things that we're doing would be an artist side?
I mean, I'm just putting it
or
out
artist
there.
agent in a sense?
I mean, it's something that just occurred to me, because I think often, like, as an artist, you know, you're on your own and like negotiating with an institution, which is like a number of people, and it's much easier for them to say, oh, well, you know, we just don't have it in our budget this time, or, you know, like, we just, you know, we can't really afford that. Whereas, like, if you have this like legitimizing agency, it's easier to kind of negotiate for these things, maybe.
I'm a musician also. I'm not primarily a visual artist. My name is Reg Bloor. Between my husband and I, we make our entire living from our music. But our experience varies to the extreme. Like he said, if they want you, they will pay. They will come up with the money. But a name is worth more than the work. And in my experience, it's music that's arty. So we've dealt with museums, we've dealt with symphony orchestras, we've dealt with music venues, rock venues, Hollywood, and it just varies to the extreme. I mean, from signing the rights to use something in a Hollywood trailer pays 20 times more than something that takes months to write and put on and rehearse. And I mean, I don't know what else to say about that, but yeah, the name is worth more than the work. The work does not have value.
The marketability.
There's like a reversal in what has value. It's the work is not, the labor is not considered something of value.
Right. But you also don't have like an expensive product like a visual artist would have to sell ultimately, because you're dealing with music, so you're dealing with CDs or technical.
Well, it's not necessarily an object. I mean, sometimes it's an object.
But I feel the labor is valued in what you do.
But even as far as like to put on a performance, you know.
That philosophy is. Well, hold on, let's get right here. We've got a model up here. You want to?
Well, it was just a really short thing on the value, or who's going to pay the fees. My name is Vika Jensen, I'm Norwegian, so I have a lot of experience with fees and getting paid by institutions because there's very different systems there. But one thing that is organized by Norwegian artists is that every time you sell a work, 3% of the sales price goes to a fund that is funding, you know, fees for other artists. So it's like, it's not only, it doesn't only have to be in the institution's budget, it can also, you know, you're mentioning solidarity. There are other models out there as well. That's interesting. And that makes artists feel good too, not only to get paid, but to actually contribute when you are successful in actually selling work to the fund, you know, that goes around. I mean, I think the
Is that
combination.
government regulated policy, or is that?
It's regulated through the Artists Union and through all museums, all institutions that have supported.
So you have to give 3% if you want to be a member. But if you're not a member, you don't, and you don't benefit.
No, regardless of if you're a member as an artist, you have to give the 3% if you are paid by you show in an institution that is.
So does on the institution side, do they also give 3%? Because that comes off the top for artists, right?
So even also on public art projects, it's like they set aside 3% of the money that they got from the government to do the project, for example, or if it's the transport union, everybody has to pay into this fund, but whatever they finance goes 3% into the fund.
What if you were represented by a gallery in New York and you were in the region? Would that apply still? Like if somebody was representing you outside of the state?
I don't think the state of Norway is going to pursue what I would show, but I have not even thought about that because, within the country, this is how it works. But it's like the state is not like a galleryist in that sense. I mean,
Okay, let's go front and then back.
I'm Erin Sickler. I wanted to pick up a little bit on what Josh said. I think there's a pressure on institutions, small institutions especially, to get every year to grow, to get more butts in the seats, to get more people in the door, to have more and more programming. It's like that capitalist drive towards more and more and more production. And so that has, over time, the budgets have been eroded. And what Amanda said, like I have worked as an institutional curator and had to deal with budgets where I didn't get to pay fees for artists. Now as an independent curator, I don't. Unless it's like a small artist-run space where it's like I'm having fun with friends, I will not take on a project where there are no artist fees, and I ask the institutions to give me their budget, and usually I find some space in their budget, even if that means I have to design the brochure myself. I do it as a symbolic gesture to say, actually, you can pay artist fees, and usually the response of the administrator is that these artists won't get paid now, but later on they're going to make a lot of money. Like there's this potential that the artist can make a lot of money, but the administrator will never make that kind of money. And the curator will never make that, will never make anywhere near to what the most successful artist will make. So that creates this tension between that. Someone's getting paid more than the artist, like, a little bit at a time, but they don't have ever that potential of wealth that supposedly artists have. Most artists will never see that either. But it creates this tension where people that could be allies are kind of fighting against each other. So I think we shouldn't just look at the small arts institution as like the enemy. We should really look at a bigger funding structure and put pressure also on philanthropists. If you're going to give money, then really give money and give it to the artist. This is where it needs to go, and not to the marketing.
Part of the problem really is it's just sort of like the structural problem with budgets. It's so weird that there is no line item in a budget for artist fees. It goes under either outside professional services or I can't remember the other one. But you can't look at a budget and find proof that an artist fee is being paid. And that I don't understand. I mean, I
even be a
really
legal
understand
thing
how that
needs to happen.
What's that?
It might even be a legal thing that needs to
It
happen.
does, and we want to have a panel about institutional budget priorities and transparency, because I think it's a combination of all of these things, of like them all working in tandem together to make all of this.
Can I chime in quickly? W.A.G.E has been really clear that we feel that the institution is part of our community, that the artists and the institution are part of the same community. We don't identify people as enemies, or at least we hope not, although we have personal feelings about who are our enemies. So I just want that to be part of the dialogue, because we feel like being here is a part of that acknowledgement.
But I think there are people who probably see the fee or this discussion as pointing at institutions.
I guess it's well, I think that's what I mentioned let me clarify that introduction I made, which is interstitial change within an institution as opposed to restructuring the entire culture of like essentially tearing down the institution and building something else. We're actually working within this model at this moment, and that's our goal is to sort of react and see how malleable that model is or how we can understand the model better as artists. So that's why we're here.
And also to reward institutions that are doing what we hope they would do instead of shaming those that don't. So it's, I think there's an important difference.
Well, yeah, the question is what are we for, what are we against, and those questions are really important to us.
Well,
sorry, just, no, I'm sorry.
You guys are over here. I'm gonna get in the back there.
Is it me?
Yeah.
I'm Martha Schweindoner. I'm a writer, so I'm kind of outside of the system, and we have a system getting totally screwed over. But in terms of the transparency, and I haven't really been in on the wage conversation in a while, so I don't know what you've looked at. But one of the sort of transparency models, at least in the gallery world, is ABAA. So, and that is self-regulating, but it is a kind of prestige thing that you're agreeing to these models and you're agreeing to these sort of sets of principles. The other thing, and this has come up on the sort of arts and labor, Accupennial, some of these other forums recently, so I've already said this, so this is sort of old news, but I'm a musician, I'm not really active now, but I'm on BMI, and so ASCAP and BMI are in a sense essentially what you're trying to do is get artist royalties, and those are for mechanical royalties because the record label will tend to screw you over. What's that? For performance royalties. Or mechanical royalties for anything played like in Singapore or whatever, you get all the... That's performance. Yeah. But that's like 60 years ahead of artists, you know, so I mean musicians had this figured out a long time ago, they were totally screwed over. So I'm just wondering if you guys have looked at those models because they're really established, but the other thing that happens is that, you know, you have to have a system in terms of those, you know, where it's set up, where, you know, I do get royalties that'll say like Singapore, Hong Kong, and that's a very large range. To sort of figure that out, you know, stuff like sound scan, like that. But, you know, how large, is this only within this country, or is it also within Europe, or is it Asia? You know, so at any rate, those are pretty effective models, though, that have worked for artists. And on multiple levels, because I was on a very small independent label and a very large independent label, and it still, you know, gets that. So how to take the very small institution and the very large institution and sort of bind it together and have them work by the same system.
You wanted to?
I'm Ben Davis, and I guess what the conversation was sort of making me think was, in the same way as Hans was talking about how, you know, there's a big variation within artists, between the superstars and the rest of the rest. It's also true of museums and of nonprofit institutions. It's actually a pretty well formulated concept in cultural economics or museum economics. There are like superstar institutions that like 1% of arts institutions control over 80% of the resources and assets. And that's actually gotten worse over time. Whereas the big institutions have advantages that they compound, it's more glamorous to support them for rich people, and so on. And that's, I imagine that's part of the squeeze, you know, particularly on small institutions over time, is that things are actually getting more equal within the non-profit sector. So I just think that's a good frame to have the conversation within, because as I understand it, it is, like in Canada, it's a sliding scale. I mean, you're advocating for a sliding scale where it's like, depending on the resources of the institution, that would determine what kind of fees would be available. And totally scandalous that the ones that have the most resources, like it's the least, are the ones that are most inaccessible. So it seems like kind of the way to frame the problem is, whatever we're doing down here at our space is kind of symbolic, kind of trying to build on a kind of moral argument and validate artistic labor as labor, and also just convince some of those artists who don't want to talk about it and do show in museums that their peers could really benefit if they would speak up. And I don't know, I guess I just kind of wanted to frame it from that sort of larger perspective.
I'm going to do those two and come back to you guys.
I just wanted to, I'm Bill Powhida. I just wanted to comment. I did a kind of residency this summer where it was one of the first times I got paid like a honorarium, and it was a good amount of money, but it was also like a lot of work. You know, it was like teaching, and so I really felt like that term cultural worker was really important. I didn't understand that component necessarily going into it. But then it entered this kind of contract negotiation. I didn't know what the hell I was getting into, where they were like, we'll just chop the artwork you make in half. You know, like, we'll chop it in half. You'll get half, and we'll keep half, and we'll put it together like a key. I was like, I don't know what the hell this is, so you can have it. Yeah, it was the strangest thing. Yeah. I ended up with the copyright. I mean, I have the images in the computer, and that was like, no. They should have, but I just didn't, you know, and it was a really weird experience, and I didn't have any, you know, like, background, and I didn't have anyone to advocate for me, so I just was like, whatever, just keep banging up, and take my disc. I don't know. So it was really strange, and I just feel like that's something that there's not standards or practices for. I didn't know.
Okay, hands are going up.
I feel like this could be a very long meeting.
We did write marathon into the
Yeah. So let me make some suggestions for like further avenues of investigation.
Yeah.
I think you really have to quantify things. You know, the reason why it works for the maid service to say, I wash, you know, I do this and it costs this much, is that if you don't pay that, it doesn't happen. You know, in visual art, the labor of making the piece is asynchronous with the installation of the piece or the exhibition of the piece. So visual artists have this problem that the stuff is there, the work's already been done, so why are they asking to be paid for it, right? So you have to think about like, what would a fee structure be that was based around work that already exists versus what would a fee structure be around work that was made on commission versus what would, you know, a fee structure was based around a particular event. Those things can't all really be lumped in.
And just so you know, we use the carback model, and that's already in your fee schedule.
Great. I mean, I think that would really help in this discussion because I think people are pulling in a lot of examples from different places.
Yeah, I would clarify that we have modeled different fee schedules, but carpack being the main one because they're so close, based on reproduction, installation, exhibition, commission. So I'm sorry, that wasn't clarified, but that's something we're going to look at to actually implement what we want to do here. And I don't know if you have another point there.
I do, which is that I think that one of the other things that really characterized these organizations that were involved in NAO, like EAI, Electronic Arts Intermix, was that they were staffed by artists and they had artists on their boards. That was also a big reason for membership, and I think something that the organization could advocate for is artist representation on the boards of these institutions. That's one of the things that would change it. And then also to do services like provide seminars on contract negotiation for artists, so that people don't go into these situations blind and that they know what it is that they can ask for, even if it's with an institution that may not have guaranteed before it. But the fact that you know to ask for that, or you know to find out about what happens to the work after, all of that stuff, those are things that people need training and support for, and it's one of the things that would be an easy goal for this organization, is to start to provide access to that kind of training.
Yeah, that's actually one of the outcomes of we're hoping one of the outcomes of this partnership is that we'll end up with all the downloadable, hopefully free as well, fee schedule, sample contracts, and best practice models. So that is the goal. But again, just to reiterate, like the idea is that we want everybody to help us figure out what that is going to be. So we just sort of deciding on
nonprofit that was poet-run and has been since the 60s. And just kind of speaking to your second question you laid out, which was what are our expectations for wage certification, I think it's sort of a chicken and an egg thing with regard to an overarching shift in the attitude of what the larger public, philanthropists to donors to people in museums view as how artists are perceived. And I feel like, with all due respect, the talk tonight showed me some real glaring blind spots in how artists are perceived with these mythologies of overwhelmingly coming from wealth, they're not coming from immigrant backgrounds and things like this. And I feel like the only way to efficiently enact some sort of standardization for artist fees is to have a really wide-reaching shift in cultural perception of what the artist is doing and what the artist deserves. And just an interesting note with regard to the poetry project where I work is for years and years and years we weren't getting, our NEA grants were getting cut, we just weren't getting funding. Every year it was sliding down and down I worked there from 2005 to 2010. And we brought in an expert to go over our whole budget, and she's like, well, you guys aren't paying yourselves enough, the staff of 3. And so you look to the larger bodies that are giving you money, that you're not valuing yourself enough, so they're not going to value you. So it was this really interesting light bulb going on that, oh, so once the artistic director, program coordinator, and program assistant salaries were raised after I left significantly, the grants started coming back in. And it was just like this inversion of the model that I hadn't even considered. And I feel like the same sort of philosophy could be applied to the artists, that if we really, take ourselves seriously, and not that we don't, but in this workaday way of what we're worth, and that model is created through wage, that for me, what I'd like to see the certification lead to is a shift in the cultural attitude, because that will lead to people being looser with the pocket change they're giving or the endowments they're granting.
But the flip side, the other side of that is I think that the investment on the part of foundations and funders has to do with them seeing growth. So, but that's interesting too, because it speaks to this idea of investment. So if you give them the sense of your career, you can apply that logic to an individual artist's career as well. I don't have a particular point to make, but I think that's part of what you're talking about. It's really important.
Are you done? You got absorbed? Okay.
Well, I feel like back to Corinne's point, I guess I would ask you guys in a really genuine way, what's the value of a symbolic fee? What are you trying to do with a symbolic fee? Because at this point in my life, symbolic fees don't do shit for me. Doesn't help me pay my rent, doesn't help me live my life. Still forces me to have a job that's not the job that I'm good at, that I'm trained to do. So I guess I want to know what the value of a symbolic fee is one, and then two, if you're organizing and spending so much energy, why wouldn't you at this point begin to ask for what you're worth? I think is tricky, but what you need to what you need to do your work, what a living wage would be. What would, if you're going to do all this work, it strikes me as I would like to see this body say, so that when you say, I'm going to need $10,000 to do this 3 months of work for you to get this installed in the museum, the museum can't be like, damn, that's so much money because I know I can get another 5 artists to do it for less. If there's a solidarity movement building, you actually have the chance to begin to ask for what you actually need in order to make the work that you do.
I think it would be really interesting to hear if Stefan or Richard it would be interesting to hear from people who actually work in institutions to say, what happened if we did that.
Sorry. This is the only discussion that if it's a business situation, you're in a business place, it's not like the person who's selling their product is gee, I wonder if they're going to be okay with that budget. Y'all, you make no money. You make no money. It's a really strange thing. It's a really strange thing it's a really intense psychological thing where you're like, God, I'm worried about these institutions that are multi-million-dollar institutions. I'm not sure I'm gonna be able to pay my $2,000 fee. Like, I think I agree with Corinne. Like, once you begin to say, like, I'm sorry, but I can't live on that. Like, I make more money on unemployment than doing this.
If you're a whole artist, is that if you say no, then let's find someone else.
Okay, but you're building a solidarity movement. You're building a solidarity movement where you need to be able to say, like, you know what, I'm going to take that risk, and I'm going to hope that the next guy is not going to be like, sure, I'll do it for less. Like, you do the same.
I don't think the risk can be taken individually. That risk
That's
has
exactly
to be
right.
part of it.
But that's you're building. You're making.
I will say about symbolic capital that I have lots of ideas about it, but personally, I can be anecdotal. Like a third to a half of my income last year, which was really bad, came from various fees, not only in the U.S. but outside the U.S. So for me, it's not nothing, or for me, it's not negotiable that I get a fee. I guess that I would start from that place where WAGE started. And I think what you're saying is, where is WAGE going? WAGE started saying that there's no reason to work without a fee. There should never be a coercion to work without a fee. And now we say, what does it mean to provide fees? And I think, yeah, the larger question is being put to the administration of artist space. And I'm glad to hear.
I think it'd be rad to like maybe even talk about it as a living wage and not a fee. Like why? I mean, I'm just I'm curious. Like,
that's
why is it different from any other kind of job that needs to be able?
Well, I get fees from other places too. It's not just art institutions.
Actually, I thought.
Are you? You got something to say?
Well, I was just going to say that actually, I feel really positive. My year was pretty positive last year, and I think some of it was that I just want to introduce that I do feel that solidarity is happening. I do feel in solidarity with people announce. I do feel that people are starting to ask things. I have been having experiences where curators are coming and they're budgeting in their artist fees. And I also feel like this, in terms of some symbolism, that this thing that's so awkward that we're talking around, this awkwardness of how to speak for yourself and put yourself forward and say what you're worth. The symbolic is doing something to introduce that awkwardness to the whole thing. So even if it is like, $150, the independent curator going to the administrator, they know that's being addressed somehow. And I do feel, I just want to put that out there in some ways to say something positive, is I do feel that something is starting to grow and something is shifting. And then in specificity to what you are doing in artist space, I think the thing I like the best is as simple as you guys focusing on that line in the budget that clarifies, specifies that this is an artist fee separate from production. And that's really important because I think both should be happening. I think there should be an artist fee which is connected to your living wage, and then I think we should be getting paid for materials.
I know Richard wants to talk about it. You can speak to this. Are you going to speak directly to that, or do you want to?
Yeah.
I just don't want to cut someone else off of this.
Well, just if you asked him, I didn't ask him.
I'm Richard Birkin from Artist Space. I think one of our main interests in the relationship with wages is the nature of the certification program and how we can actually kind of look at some very practical and pragmatic conditions that we're under here by looking quite closely at budgets and seeing how we proportion things. Because we already pay artist fees. The question of whether we pay artist fees to a suitable level is one that we want to look at. And it is a question of finding a way to pay a living wage, not just a symbolic fee. And we feel that we do that to a certain extent already, but it's very difficult to know how to balance that and how to find a kind of relative space for the level of work that's committed to a project or the nature of the work that's committed to a project. And I think this is part of the process with WAGE really, is to see how this certification can be nuanced enough to deal with real missions. And that is about opening up a budget structure, the whole budget structure, not just looking at the single line item of artist fees and where it appears, but relative to everything else, the money we put into everything else goes towards projects we do.
Did you want to?
Yeah, and I just had a brief,
Okay.
mostly terminological. I don't know, this might not be important, but I mean, I'm a writer and a grad student, and I'm part of a union of grad students at Berkeley, and I used to work in New York. I was a curatorial assistant, so I know like different positions in the world, in this world, unfortunately none of which is actually as an artist. But I mean, just in my experience with our union and I don't know, like just sort of knowing what this world is like a bit, like it might not make sense to think about art institutions as enemies, but that doesn't mean that thinking about that doesn't mean we should like not think about exploitation and the dynamics of class struggle that revolve around it. Because I mean, you can be exploited by people who you don't dislike or who don't like, you know, point a gun at you or anything like that. So you know, like you know, the wisdom in the union movement is always just like you won't get anything that you don't fight for. I think like this is a fight, and I think it's awesome you guys are doing it. But you know, I wouldn't stray away from, or I wouldn't like stick so firmly to conciliatory, cooperative tactics that the prospect of like, you know, an artist strike or something like that is off the table. Because I've heard a couple times people saying like, well, if I don't do it, then they'll just get someone else. Well, like, you need to produce conditions where they can't get someone else because you have solidarity that is real and not just sort of like, we like each other.
Go here.
Okay, I think that there's sort of two issues there. There's like the idea of the living wage, but there's also the idea of industry standard. So the idea that like, okay, like for this job, usually artists are paid X amount, then it's like, okay, that's this sort of poetry project argument in a sense as well, that like, if you set a standard, if you set a higher standard, then people feel inclined to pay a higher amount. But then there's the idea of like the living wage, like how much does it cost to produce this work, like how much time do you put into it, how much money do you need in order to live, to keep making this work. So I think that, I don't know, I think that like there has to be a way to move the argument past the idea of like yes, people should definitely be paid, but then it's like the payment, I think with solidarity can be based on the idea that like this is the standard, like you can't get an artist who's going to work for less than this, like you can't expect people to do things if you're not going to pay like this amount. And I think the idea that someone else brought up earlier of this kind of like estimate is not necessarily a bad idea because, I don't know, I think about like grant writing work that I've done, and like even the process of writing the grant, you say like I'm paying the grant writer this amount, I'm paying like this person this amount, and so I need this amount of money from you to pay all these people that I'm paying to not only do the work, but to propose doing the work. And then more money is brought in originally. So I think like the way that budgets in a nonprofit work is slightly different, but it's still based on this concept of like getting funding from various sources. And I think that if it starts from the beginning with this idea that there is a certain amount of money is required in order to really pay people and do everything else, then I think like there can be this movement, and this argument that like people work for less just seems like the only way to get past that is by making it really transparent, like, no, this is the standard, and like you shouldn't work for less. Oh, you work for less? Like, well, why are you? You know, because you're making it harder for everybody else. You're the intern who's willing to just work for free instead of saying, no, I need to be paid like just $10, or I need to be given my transportation, or even though I'm like a beginning worker, I'm bringing down the kind of standard by being willing to work for nothing.
The other thing, just in relation to that, is that, you know, if there was an industry standard, and or say there isn't, like there is now, you can go to a nonprofit and they ask you to have a show, and you say, oh, well, I want this more money, and they say, no. There's also the commercial gallery sphere. So there's like the sphere of speculation, and then there's this like other sphere, which is like I guess essentially the gift sphere, but it's also like the idea that that's sort of like more guaranteed income in the nonprofit sphere, whereas the commercial gallery world is based on the idea of speculation. And I just always say that I think the more spheres of activity we have, the better, because then the more options of payment that we have. So it's actually really good that all of these things
Well, let's go Zoe and then we'll come here. Okay.
So I'm Zoe Leonard. I'm an artist, visual artist. On a personal level, to answer that question, I have received artist fees, but really rarely. More so in Europe than here. One thing that's helped a lot is that a lot of travel, when you travel, when I do shows in other places, you're usually given a per diem. And it seems really small, but that's actually just like actually allowing me to live a number of times in my life where I'm getting a fee actually for being there, where it's just like going to cover, you know, food while I'm there. I have one funny story about an artist fee. I want to say something first.
Can you talk up, Zoe?
Okay, sure. So there's so many different models here. This is such an amazing conversation. And I wanted to sort of speak back to this question about, that Latia brought up about fees and symbolic fees and versus a living wage. And I was sitting here thinking about, I really love the idea of the artist fee for going in when we're doing an installation or when at the moment at which you have the relationship with that institution. It's difficult to quantify, but I like thinking about, I like the idea of that fee for that interaction, as opposed to really thinking about them paying me a wage, because I don't really want to be working conceptually. I don't really want to be working for that institution. I don't want to be part of the institution in that way. I want my work to be recognized and I want to be remunerated for the work that I'm doing, but I am separate from that institution and I don't want them to consider that I work for them. So that was just kind of a conceptual thought about that might apply to structure at some point. And I think in terms of like pragmatically what that fee can be, I mean it's gonna take a lot of negotiation. And I think it's hard, just even going around this room, so many different kinds of situations and models of working, be it you know, royalties or reproduction fees, because some of us make an object that we then take away from the museum and we can sell, or an object that we can take away and put in storage and pay storage on. Or some of us who, you know, maybe it's a one-time thing, it's a performance, it's ephemeral. So I think it's a very complicated thing to quantify, but incredibly important to figure out a way to do so. But this one story that I was thinking about, at one time, the only time I think I was ever actually offered a commission, I was offered a commission to make a piece for this show that actually had to do with labor. The show was actually about labor. And somewhere about midway through the process, I'd worked on this piece for like half a year. I got a phone call from the curator who said, oh, we've lost our funding and we're dropping your commission. And I was like, what? Excuse me? And I got off the phone and I thought about it and I thought, okay, in no other business anywhere would that be okay? And so I spoke to a few different people and I thought about the model of the writer and the kill fee. So I called her up and I said, okay, that's all well and good, but I need a kill fee. And we settled on something that was, the commission was going to be $10,000 and she gave me $1,000, which was symbolic but really helpful. Like $1,000 was real money to me, and it is real money to me now. So I found a number of times where I've been willing to put that forward and ask for something, ask for a fee. It doesn't always work, but sometimes it does. And I think it's worth explaining that to the curator, and not necessarily seeing them as your enemy, but understanding that they're working out of a framework where they're not really seeing you. Like, they're seeing an aspect of you and your life, but and maybe a stereotype of who they think you are or what it takes for you to make your living. And that maybe it can be more of a conversation. And the only other thing I wanted to say, because this conversation is so expansive, is to think about the kind of notable, this notable drive for the capital improvement project that's happened in so many institutions in New York and around the world, where really hundreds of millions of dollars get raised to build a building. It seems like it's been like the time of the building and funding the building, but not the art or the artist or
the school or the students.
Yeah, exactly. Like Cooper Union, the model you're talking about in education, and so many others. And I think that when there was kind of conversation about offering to educate board members or to think about like where capital improvement projects could be directed, and is it, you know, is there a way to kind of frame this as some kind of project that they want to think about? Because it affects not only, it also affects acquisition budgets, and all these museums are completely broke now because they built during the boom and now they're fucked, you know, and it's, you know, MoMA, it's like $20 to go in the museum that they spent. And someone else was talking about the resources, like certain institutions sucking up all the resources, like they like suck all the donations and then use that money for that. So I think there's a relationship somewhere in terms of like real estate versus art and artists that are going into it.
I was just going to add that when I was listening to you talk about artist space, yeah, you can't do it by yourself, and definitely like you need to be in partnership. If these changes are to happen, like more organizations are going to need to be in conversation and cooperation with each other. And I think the best idea is to have that 3% thing. That if all of these, if with you with artist space after this work happens here, then you can go to the other organizations. Let's say you get 5 of the coalitions, the kitchen, I don't know what else, who your friends are right now, but you know. And then if you make that pool of saying, okay, we're going to give next year's budget, we're going to calculate 3% in our budget needs to go to this fund. And then in other conversations I've been, there's been a lot of talk about what if commercial galleries somehow required in their business license. I don't understand all the functions of this, but this has come up several times in other conversations that commercial galleries had to pay like 1% of their total profit into this similar fund. Now then, of course, in the question in both of these discussion groups I've been into is always like, well, then who qualifies for the fund? Is it exhibiting artists that qualify for the fund? Is anybody called an artist? And then we get into those technicalities, but that would be a really positive shift in terms of.
Well, it generally helped fund artist fees across the board. When someone is asked.
You're talking about pension and healthcare. This fund
you're talking about
would be
pension.
towards the living wage idea, because I don't think artists, I think it's true, like certain groups that are being really open to this right now possibly aren't dealing with the budgets that are going to be able to pay our living wage, you know? But that's, so that could this collective fund help fuel some of that, you know? Like maybe at the end of the year, if you're one of these artists and you get a check for like $2,100 in the mail, like every February, yearly, I mean, that would help a lot of people. Or is it etc.
Can I respond to Zoe? Okay. Yeah, let's do that. Am I missing people? Yeah. Why don't we? Well, I just want to do here, and then we'll go over there because you.
I think
it's really important for artists like yourself, Zoe, and all artists
artists who have, anytime we have an interaction with a curator or one of these institutions, or somebody on, or a board member, I think this issue of to start really, I mean, more than just asking for a fee, which I also do now too. I mean, W.A.G.E is screwed, just really raise my awareness about the issue. But now it's not just about asking for the fee and the kill fee or whatever fee you need, but it's raising the issue and encouraging, you know, our artist friends. I don't know, somebody was talking about why there aren't like these superstar artists. You know, it's like the 1% superstar people here. And I think it's because they don't think this issue applies to them, because they don't live on wages, and it's not, the wage is nothing. But it's really important that, because that it is a symbolic wage, because as Steiner was telling me yesterday, it levels the playing field on a way, and it shows everybody that this is I don't know, how do you put it, Steiner, that it's a working wage.
It talks about solidarity in a way that the community is really fractured, I believe. And that it shouldn't matter whether you're really wealthy, you can always donate your fee back to the institution into something like a 3% fund.
Yeah.
For instance, if you don't want your fee, but the fact is that if you know you're getting paid, then you know everyone's getting paid, then you know that payment is necessary for people to receive. So it's an acknowledgement, not only about symbolic income, but about income. That's what we were talking about.
I was just going to say that I worked at a private foundation for a long time, and I think that most funders are trying to be impactful, and they're responding to the field, and that they probably aren't aware of this being such an issue, the same way a lot of us had to have our consciousness raised in a way. And to the point, to jump on what Andrea was saying, that if you get 5 institutions and they all apply to one funder and say, not only artist fees as a line item, but I want $40,000 for artist fees for the years, or $100,000, then even if they don't get it right away, they might reevaluate their funding practices, and that could be something that's possible later on. And the more institutions that do that, the more they're going to start having those conversations and mixing with the funders and talking about why now, why do so many people need artist fees? Obviously the economy sucks, maybe it's the time we should reevaluate. So I think it's great.
I just want to say that artist space and organizations like it exist because artists 40 years ago were not being supported by the commercial structures, the commercial galleries. They were not being supported by the museums that were there. That's why they got together and formed alternative organizations. So, you know, I think that, I don't think that the commercial art world nor the high-end museum world has actually changed all that much over the 40 years. I don't think that there's going to be a whole lot of recourse there, because those are institutions that are built to satisfy certain particular needs, and I don't think that you're necessarily going to be able to change them. I do think that you can ask the question of any institution, how much of your budget is paid directly to artists? What percentage of your annual budget is paid directly to artists? And the more you ask them that question, and the more you try to get them to report on that, the more that they will understand that that is something that they need to be thinking about. Similarly, I totally agree with you that, that foundations and funders, to some extent, are guided by the field. If organizations go to them and say, it is a priority for us as an organization, what distinguishes us is that we pay fees directly to artists, regardless of the outcome of the project, which is the way that we used to phrase it, that funders will understand that that is a value that they should be looking for. But you also have to understand that the reason why we're saddled with this notion of growth as being important for arts institutions, and this notion of being tied to real estate and gentrification, is because there was a collapse of the sort of old guard of private philanthropy, and the thing that took up the slack was people from the corporate world, for whom, if they're running a business and that business doesn't grow, that business is a failure. In other words, that business moved backwards because it didn't get bigger. And it was that idea, those people bringing that culture into the nonprofit art world, that upended this sort of value of what, where is the money going to go? Why can't we quantify it? What do you mean you're paying artists? So that's something else that really has to be addressed. Why is there all this money that's going into these capital campaigns? Well, because there are real estate people on the boards of these organizations. There are people from corporations on the boards of these museums. That's who's donating the money, and that's who's dictating the direction of those organizations. And that's why I think it's also really important to advocate for an artist voice at the board level of these organizations, because otherwise those concerns remain invisible.
I think also the city is incentivizing capital projects. It's not, it's coming down from a very high level.
Yeah, those are tax breaks, and look who's our mayor, a billionaire from the corporate world.
They are, but it's also a way of, I'm probably going to get in deep shit for saying this, but it's also a way of redistributing tax dollars. That's the idea, is that to promote growth via real estate is going to actually increase tax revenue, which will actually is supposed to go back into helping people.
Right.
That's the idea.
In theory, but we've seen what it actually does, which is to price people out of.
Of course. I'm just saying it's a larger. I think it's a really huge issue. That goes beyond that.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things we're trying to do is one of the is to have funders come in. We talk about the viability of the system of accountability, where all nonprofits have to do is basically show canceled checks and pay overseas, and that would be the criteria we would tell their funding will be green or given at all. And so I think that's just super key. It's getting more levels of administration on board.
I just want to take a temperature check. How's the room feeling? I feel like there's that, we've reached some kind of dissipation, long evening, and I want to make sure that anybody and everybody who feels the need to say something has gotten something out there. So is there anyone whose voice feels like they haven't been heard, and especially the issue of, is there a reason to not have artist speaks? Because I think that's something that hasn't been addressed, but maybe there's no one who feels that way, which is fine.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So have you thought about inviting council people and trying to, I don't know, you were talking
City
about
council?
City council and I don't know, people who are involved,
Laws, yeah. This is a funny thing where we've been approaching it from the angle of a kind of.
I would say we're looking for self-regulation at this juncture, which is starting with Artist Space, a very small-scale project, to talk about this implementation. I don't know that self-regulation is our ultimate goal, but I think that we want to start there. I'll just clarify that.
It came out of a kind of practicality of how do you change a government level thing, and having the government level thing come down on institutions to do something, as opposed to advocating from the ground up, the usefulness of what everyone really needs, and making it a self-regulated and a desirable relationship to produce. And I don't, because we've also had people who come from European situations where they're like, well, everything's so government regulated that nobody does anything if it's not fun, there's no self-initiative, or there's this reverse issue that comes up, and where we were kind of wondering if there was a model that could, not impose that kind of, or this is also something that kind of in Canada, we have friends who started, we showed this space that was a bag, it's feminist art gallery. And they were like, they came up with self-funding models specifically because CARPAC would not fund anything that had a political agenda. And so what happens when you know, so there's a lot of questions at play, is like, what's the usefulness of going government down or going self-regulating up, or like, what's a model that can be the most productive for keeping the organic structure of an arts community that wants to potentially be political or not. Or any of those.
Well, I would just say that autonomy has come up several times between Hans's talk and even Zoe's comments, so I think that's part of what we're discussing as well.
I just think about the role of the media, like how are you tapping into that in terms of like raising awareness or solidarity or whatever, in terms of like, this is what the museums are doing, they're not making people underpay for these, and that's like this idea of transparency. It seems like within that, like you're talking about like the difficulty of getting regulation from the government. The media is like so tied to government. It feels like the media is like a huge power in this country. So it seems like that is a quick or possible way, though difficult at times, like to get those stories out there. But if people are kind of writing about that, it seems like that is kind of
I'll put you on my podcast. There you go. We're the biggest art podcast.
It'd be pretty easy to get on Leonard Mopay.
Look that up.
We need a media officer.
Yeah. Also, I want to just say, I have a computer here if anybody wants to type in their email if they want to be maybe a direct supporter, in the sense that we want to be called on to assist in getting through all of this. If you have interest in being a little more dedicated, then we'd love to have your information separate from our mailing list. Like dedicated task team.
The other thing that Leah would really talk about, just we should just talk about that, part of the counterpoint to these talks, or the other part of these talks, is that we're planning think tanks to kind of focus the discussion. Was we've had this kind of like amazing outpouring of ideas, and then the next day we kind of have a smaller group, which really hashes out these ideas.
It's like artist space and
yeah, but the idea is to sort of translate that into like potentially policy change, you know, into stuff that we can actually use. So I think it's important to us to have representatives who, you know, people that are really dedicated and really like talking about this stuff. So just to put that out there, that if you're interested in potentially participating, that, you know, give us your email, let us know how and why, and, you know, we hope to be able to work people into it. It's just so far it's been sort of idea of like having kind of, not experts, but people who know more than we do to contribute in the think tank process. But I think it would be also useful to have people who are also
Okay, let's go there and then we'll take the two of them.
Why don't you jump oh, sorry.
You go, I saw you, I'm sorry, we'll do that.
Okay. Are you getting any sense of the temperature of the institutions in terms of what's your vibe? I mean, obviously they're all different and they're all on these tiers, but my feeling is that we I've always tended to assume that there's all this exploitation because nobody really knows and nobody talks about it. But you know, on a person-to-person level, there are curators and programmers who occasionally just break the mold, and I'm like, oh, you know, it can be done. It is possible. I mean, right now I'm doing something and I'm actually getting a commission because it's an institution I hadn't dealt with before, and that's the way they do it. They actually, it's not outside of the realm of possibility. It's just the way they're functioning now, and it's a pleasant surprise. But we're kind of used to certain institutions not paying because they expect that the prestige is enough, that kind of thing. And I'm very curious as to whether you're already able to get a sense from specific places about, are they interested? Are they angry? Are they embarrassed? Are they, you know, are they willing to come to the table? Do they know that there is a table?
You know, I think it's come to us in different levels. I think Artist Space has been the most forthright and official in wanting to establish a serious dialogue around it. We've had curators from the MoMA say that they would like to present that as a possibility within their institution. But, you know, and I've had curators at other institutions say they will advocate, so there's often seems to be a certain level, administrative level, that's willing to take on that battle, but it's not clear that it's that top tier, that director tier is not always. I mean, this is something that we're working on, and yes, people have come to us, but it's not usually the director that comes to us. It's people in the mechanism that want to change it, actually, which is maybe the best way for us to work. I don't know.
And also, we don't say that nobody pays artist fees, but we generally talk about across the board the prevalence of it, which is what our survey helps us figure out specifically in New York. But we do know from anecdotal and also personal experience, sometimes artists incur, which is why we ask that.
Yeah, and then we'll take two. I just want to say, I think it's been interesting to kind of hear the curator come up so much as the one being the budget manager, kind of being the one between institutions, between artists, and that is a really good conversation, with those people, with curators in institutions doing independently to kind of target and focus on. And I think especially, there's how many independent curators right now, not really knowing what they're doing in terms of dealing with institutions and budgets like that. But it's really important just to kind of, as just a thing to add.
Curators teach it?
Yeah, curators teach it. I would love it. It'd be great. Or get in touch with CCS Bard. I mean, they're just so.
We actually did present up there.
Oh, good. That's great. But I mean, that needs to be built into the curriculum. It's not a
all of their last shows, they ask for fees, they get covered there. That's great. Ongoing.
Okay, that's good. That's very good. But yeah, just as kind of a specific thing, this needs to be your practice to build that in.
Yeah. And then I think the institutions that don't do that we should recognize what they are. And then my idea as a way to maybe change that, it's not, I don't know, a general strike is hard, but I think if we took say MoMA wasn't paying their artist fees or something, we could invite, say, the artists who got into the Greater New York show, or the artists who are in the Whitney Biennial, take on these big survey shows and invite specifically every single artist that's in that show to come to the meeting and to sort of, and I don't know, to get that, to ask those artists on behalf of all artists, to get them involved in RAGE, to target a very specific group of artists, and it would be a mix of artists at all different levels in shows like those. So I don't, and then ask them to, to form their own little union within the show and to ask for a fee, and that would raise consciousness within that institution. That's, could be interesting.
Yeah, I'll say on a side note that the performers in Abramovich's retrospective did form a union, and that did increase their pay that they were offered because they got the workers' comp and insurance during the show. So that is actually a viable model, but and the Whitney Biennial does not pay artist fees, so that's something that we're really interested in.
Well, there should be asked.
Right.
By all the artists who are in it.
You want to start?
I do.
I think, we're getting a lot of great feedback, but we should have I think a goal of a temperature check on
I think we had two more here.
So why don't we just take a stack of how many people would like to talk, I guess, and then we should close it up. Can we just get
two readings? And we'll cut it off? We're all good with that? Okay.
I'll be brief. I just wanted to make a general announcement for those in the room who may not be aware that a lot of these conversations are also happening in the last few months within the arts and culture of Wall Street. And so there's been rich conversations happening on all of these huge umbrella of different fronts, ranging from like building a foundation for Artist Greg and Artist Union and all kinds of different direct action initiatives. And so anybody who like is interested in carrying on those other conversations, like
beyond Artist Fees. Email is on it.
So weekly Tuesdays, so we meet tomorrow at 7:30 at 950, 590
Madison Avenue in the pop space. Public featuring.
I just, I work in an administrative position, but I also am an artist. And one thing I find myself at times very schizophrenic, which is the position of being an administrator, carrying out actions that are not, I find myself always in a position of being in conflict actually with artists more than supporting artists. And I actually think that mid-level kind of schizophrenia and frustration is going to be a very powerful tool in creating solidarity to this artist fee or the wage kind of issues. And most institutions, aside from MoMA and these big museums, are tiny. I mean, we're talking about 3 to 5 people. So I actually think that aspect of hitting kind of the mid-level kind of conversation is going to be very, very productive. So I just want to, I'm very optimistic about things, but I just want to
well, Nayland, you should correct me if my history is incorrect, but I think that to get to that point of having these artist-run spaces, artists were protesting in the streets and asking really big things of big institutions, and then that was something that came out later. So I think it would be strategically really wise to partner with people who want to take over banks and institutions and do some maybe more radical things, and then you can get the concession. We're the nice people, we just want to be. Maybe publicly it can be, oh, we hate those people, but then privately it kind of seems. No.
Good job, W.A.G.E.
Our next set of events, of course, will be announced in monthly events, and we will be discussing our survey hopefully at the next event, which will, I think, be helpful for people